Can you cook my husband's friends? Mocked their champagne glasses, catching the light of the crystal chandeliers. I smiled, looking directly into their arrogant faces, and said only if it is easier than landing a Black Hawk helicopter in a blinding sandstorm. A retired four-star Army Aviation General, standing near the bar, nearly dropped his drink. He was the exact only person in that sprawling multi-million-dollar room who knew who I really was. My name is Bethany. I am 33 years old, and somehow still healing from the wounds my own family inflicted. As a retired military pilot who now secretly runs a highly classified aviation logistics firm, I thought I had escaped the petty high school mentalities of the world. I downplayed my success to maintain a peaceful civilian life with the man I loved. But last Saturday, my husband and his family invited me to an upscale dinner party, not to celebrate, but to put me in my place. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who completely underestimated your worth. Growing up, I learned the value of discipline, hard work, and quiet confidence. My service in the military taught me that real power does not need to announce itself. My husband Cameron was exactly 35 years old and the complete opposite. He was a status-obsessed corporate executive who measured a person's worth entirely by their bank account, their designer clothes, and their social climbing abilities. We lived in a beautiful suburb of Washington, D.C., surrounded by people who cared more about country club memberships than actual character. For years, I played the supportive wife. I let Cameron take the spotlight. I let him believe that my company, Apex Logistics, was just a struggling low-level local courier service. I wore plain, unbranded dresses to his corporate events, choosing to blend into the background, rather than compete with the flashy wives of his colleagues. I thought I was keeping our marriage grounded. I had no idea I was simply making myself an easy target for their cruelty. The night everything shattered began at a lavish black-tie dinner party hosted by my mother-in-law, Patricia. Patricia was 60 years old and an elitist snob who viewed me as nothing more than a low-class burden dragging down her perfect son. The event was held at her palatial estate, designed to celebrate Cameron's impending corporate merger with a massive technology conglomerate. The driveway was lined with imported luxury cars, and a live string quartet played on the sweeping marble staircase. I stood near the edge of the grand dining room, nursing a glass of sparkling water, feeling entirely out of place among the sea of silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. Cameron was across the room, completely ignoring me. Instead, he was aggressively networking, pouring expensive champagne for a striking 26-year-old woman named Savannah. Savannah was the daughter of the billionaire CEO that Cameron was so desperate to merge his firm with. I watched as Cameron leaned in close to her, laughing at something she said, his hand resting casually on the small of her back. A sharp pang of betrayal hit my chest, but I pushed it down. I told myself it was just business. It was just his ambition talking. That was when Patricia materialized beside me, smelling of heavy floral perfume and old money entitlement. She did not offer a greeting. She did not ask how I was doing. Without a single word of warning, she shoved a heavy stack of dirty, grease-stained appetizer plates directly into my chest. I stumbled back slightly, my hands automatically coming up to catch the porcelain before it shattered on the floor. "Make yourself useful, Bethany." Patricia snapped, her voice carrying an intentional edge of absolute disdain. "Since you clearly do not understand high-level corporate networking, you might as well clear the tables. The catering staff is overwhelmed, and frankly, you blending in with the hired help is probably the best thing you can do for Cameron tonight." I stood frozen, the dirty plates staining the front of my simple black dress. I looked past Patricia's glaring Botox-smoothed face straight across the room to my husband. Cameron had seen the entire exchange. He made direct eye contact with me. I waited for him to step forward to defend his wife, to tell his mother she had crossed a line. Instead, a cold, mocking smirk spread across his face. He turned his back to me, completely raising his glass to toast Savannah, acting as if I did not even exist. In that single agonizing second, the illusion of my marriage evaporated. The man I loved was not protecting me. He was actively participating in my humiliation. Any other woman might have dropped the plates. Any other woman might have burst into tears, caused a massive scene, and run out the front door in hysterics. But I am not any other woman. Panic gets you killed on the battlefield. Strategy keeps you alive. My military training kicked in with icy precision. I did not shed a single tear. I calmly walked over to a nearby side table, stacked the dirty plates in a perfectly neat tower, and wiped my hands with a linen napkin, using slow, deliberate military-grade discipline. I stepped back into the main dining area, deciding I was not going to hide in the kitchen like a scolded child. I walked straight toward the bar, holding my head high. But Patricia's cruelty had apparently set the tone for the evening. Cameron's inner circle of wealthy, arrogant friends noticed my stained dress and decided I was fresh prey. A group of 3 men, all executives at Cameron's firm, cornered me near the mahogany bar counter. "So Bethany," one of them sneered, looking me up and down with obvious contempt. "Cameron tells us you are still running that little delivery gig of yours. What is it called? Apex Couriers. Are you still driving the vans yourself, or have you finally managed to hire a high school student to help out?" The group chuckled, swirling their drinks. I maintained a calm, steady breathing pattern. "Apex Logistics," I corrected gently. "And we manage specialized transport." Another executive, a man who had just bought a vacation home in the Hamptons, leaned in closer, his breath smelling of stale cigars. "It is just fascinating to us," he mocked loudly, drawing the attention of several nearby guests. "Cameron is about to close a billion-dollar merger. He is moving into the absolute upper echelon of global finance. And you are what, delivering cardboard boxes across town? It really makes a man wonder what you actually bring to this marriage. Since you clearly do not bring capital, and you clearly do not bring corporate pedigree, tell us, Bethany, can you even cook?" The sheer audacity of the insult hung in the air. The surrounding guests fell quiet, waiting to see how Cameron's plain, unimpressive wife would handle being publicly humiliated by his most important colleagues. I saw Savannah looking at me with a pitying, superior smile. I saw Patricia watching from the doorway, her arms crossed in triumph. I did not break eye contact with the executive. I let a slow, razor-sharp smile spread across my face. My voice was perfectly modulated, projecting clearly across the hushed room. "Can I cook?" I asked, my tone dripping with absolute confidence. "Only if it is easier than landing a Black Hawk helicopter in a blinding sandstorm while taking ground fire." The executive blinked, his smug smile faltering for a fraction of a second before he let out a loud, condescending bark of laughter. "A helicopter," he wheezed, looking at his friends. "Right. The delivery girl thinks she is an action hero now. That is hilarious. She is not joking, you absolute fools." The booming voice came from the far side of the room, silencing the laughter instantly. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. General Richard Mitchell, a retired 4-star Army Aviation Commander and the undisputed guest of honor for the entire evening, stepped forward. He was a man who commanded respect simply by walking into a room, a military legend who now sat on the boards of 3 major defense contractors. Cameron had spent the last 6 months trying to secure a 5-minute meeting with him. General Mitchell ignored Cameron completely. He ignored the wealthy executives. He marched straight up to me, stopped on a dime, squared his shoulders, and delivered a crisp, flawless military salute. "Captain Bethany Rhodes," the general projected, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I did not realize you were attending this circus. It is an honor to see you again. For the record, gentlemen, I would trust this woman to fly me through hell itself. She has more courage, more tactical brilliance, and more strategic value in her little finger than every single suit in this room combined." The entire dining room was paralyzed. The silence was so profound you could hear the ice clinking in the glasses. The executive who had insulted me turned the color of chalk, taking a rapid step backward. Savannah's mouth dropped open in shock. Patricia froze, her champagne glass trembling in her manicured hand. But it was Cameron's reaction that sealed my fate. He did not look proud. He did not look amazed by the revelation of his wife's hidden depths. His face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. I had just effortlessly commanded the respect of the most powerful man in the room, the very man Cameron was desperate to impress. I had upstaged him, and in Cameron's world, that was an unforgivable crime. He stormed across the room, grabbing my arm with a bruising grip, dragging me away from the general and pulling me roughly down the hallway toward the coat room. The illusion was completely shattered. The war had just officially begun. Megan and my husband had no idea the kind of fire he was about to step into. I smoothed the fabric of my simple black dress, taking a slow, measured breath, before leaving the quiet of the hallway. I stepped back into the main dining room, where the air was thick with the smell of expensive cologne and the deafening buzz of corporate arrogance. Waiters in crisp white shirts wove through the crowd, carrying silver trays of caviar and vintage champagne. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water and moved toward a quiet spot near the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. In my previous career as an Army Aviation officer, I learned that situational awareness is what keeps you alive. You never step onto a battlefield without mapping out the enemy positions. Tonight, the enemy was the elitist social circle my husband Cameron worshipped. Across the room, I spotted Cameron leaning casually against the grand piano. He was completely ignoring the fact that his mother had just treated me like a hired maid. Instead, his undivided attention was fixed on Savannah. She was 26 years old, wearing a silk gown that cost more than my first car, and laughing loudly at whatever joke Cameron had just told. Her father, the billionaire CEO who held the key to Cameron's massive corporate merger, stood just a few feet away. Cameron placed his hand smoothly on the small of Savannah's back, guiding her toward the bar. A sharp, heavy pang of betrayal hit my chest, but I pushed it down instantly. Panic and emotion get you killed. I kept my face entirely impassive. I barely had a moment to collect my thoughts before a group of Cameron's wealthy colleagues noticed me standing alone. They moved through the crowd with the predatory confidence of men who believed their bank accounts made them invincible. There were 3 of them, all senior executives at Cameron's firm. They flanked me smoothly, intentionally blocking my path to the rest of the room. The man in the center holding a glass of amber bourbon took the lead. He looked me up and down, his gaze lingering on my unbranded dress with obvious disdain. "Bethany," he drawled, his voice loud enough to turn the heads of the guests standing nearby. "Cameron tells us you are still running that little delivery gig of yours. What is it called again?" "Apex Couriers. Apex Logistics." I corrected, my voice perfectly level. "Right," he smirked, exchanging an amused, condescending glance with the other 2 executives. "Are you still driving the delivery vans yourself, or have you finally managed to hire a few high school students to carry the heavy boxes for you?" The other 2 men chuckled, swirling the ice in their drinks. I did not flinch. I kept my breathing steady and my posture completely relaxed. They had no idea who they were talking to. They assumed because I wore practical boots during the day and managed dispatch invoices that I was running a failing local delivery service out of a rented garage. They did not know that Apex Logistics held highly classified, exclusive Department of Defense transport contracts worth tens of millions of dollars. They did not know that my company moved military-grade assets across the country with precision that their corporate minds could not even fathom. I let them believe their own arrogant assumptions. "We manage specialized transport," I said, offering a polite, empty smile. The executive leaned in closer, invading my personal space. The heavy scent of his liquor washed over me. "It is just fascinating to us, Bethany," he said, intentionally raising his voice so the entire section of the room could hear him. "Cameron is about to close a billion-dollar merger tonight. He is moving into the absolute upper echelon of global finance. And you are doing what exactly? Delivering cardboard boxes across town." A small crowd began to gather, drawn by the spectacle of the boss's wife being publicly humiliated. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my sister-in-law Vanessa standing nearby. She had her phone out, recording the interaction for her thousands of shallow social media followers. Vanessa had always hated me because I refused to participate in her manufactured influencer lifestyle. Now she watched with a cruel, satisfied smile, eager to see me break down. The executive took another step forward, his tone dripping with absolute contempt. "It really makes a man wonder what you actually bring to a marriage like this," he continued. "Since you clearly do not bring capital, and you clearly lack any sort of corporate pedigree, tell us, Bethany. What do you actually do all day? Can you even cook?" The sheer audacity of the insult hung heavy in the air. The surrounding guests fell completely silent, waiting to see how Cameron's plain, unimpressive wife would handle being torn apart by his most important colleagues. I looked across the room. Cameron had turned around and was watching the entire exchange. Instead of stepping in to defend his wife, he simply crossed his arms and watched with a faint sneer on his face. Savannah stood next to him, whispering something in his ear that made him chuckle. He was letting them humiliate me to prove his loyalty to their toxic social hierarchy. I turned my attention back to the executive. I did not break eye contact. I felt a familiar icy calm wash over my entire body. It was the exact same calm I felt gripping the controls of my aircraft when anti-aircraft fire lit up the night sky over Kabul. I let a slow, razor-sharp smile spread across my face. I pitched my voice perfectly, ensuring it carried across the hushed dining room without sounding strained or defensive. "Can I cook?" I asked, my tone radiating pure, unshakable confidence. "Only if it is easier than landing a Black Hawk helicopter in a blinding sandstorm while taking hostile ground fire." The executive blinked. His smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second as he tried to process my words. Then he let out a loud, condescending bark of laughter. The other executives joined in shaking their heads, as if I had just told the most ridiculous joke they had ever heard in their lives. "A helicopter," the executive wheezed, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "Right. The delivery girl thinks she is an action hero now. That is absolutely hilarious. Does Cameron know you walk around telling people these crazy stories?" The wealthy guests around us began to laugh. The sound was ugly, dismissive, and entirely cruel. They thought I was a delusional housewife trying desperately to sound interesting to a room full of millionaires. I saw Vanessa giggling behind her phone screen, capturing every second of my supposed humiliation. I saw my mother-in-law Patricia watching from the grand archway, her arms crossed in absolute triumph. They all thought they had successfully broken me. They thought I was entirely powerless and completely alone. "She is not joking, you absolute fools!" The booming voice cracked through the elegant dining room like thunder. The laughter died instantly. Every head turned toward the far side of the hall. The crowd parted immediately, instinctively stepping aside to make way for the man striding toward us. General Richard Mitchell, a retired four-star Army Aviation Commander, and the undisputed guest of honor for the entire evening, marched straight into the center of the room. General Mitchell was a military legend. He currently sat on the board of directors for 3 major national defense contractors. Cameron had spent the last 6 months begging his political connections just to secure a 5-minute meeting with the general. The entire purpose of this lavish dinner party was to impress him and secure his blessing for the upcoming merger. General Mitchell ignored Cameron completely. He ignored the billionaire CEO. He ignored the terrified executives who quickly backed away as he approached. The general stopped directly in front of me. He squared his broad shoulders, snapped his heels together, and delivered a crisp, flawless military salute. I immediately straightened my spine, stepping into a perfect posture of attention, and returned the salute out of deep, ingrained respect. "Captain Bethany Rhodes," the general projected, his voice carrying the heavy weight of absolute command. "I did not realize you were attending this circus. It is an honor to see you again, Captain." The entire dining room was paralyzed. The silence was so profound, you could actually hear the ice clinking in the forgotten glasses. No one dared to breathe. General Mitchell turned slowly to face the executives who had just been mocking me. His eyes were cold and hard. "For the record, gentlemen, I would trust this woman to fly me through hell itself." He pointed a stern, unyielding finger at the man who had asked if I could cook. "She has more courage, more tactical brilliance, and more strategic value in her little finger than every single empty suit in this room combined. She saved my life and the lives of 12 of my men during a massive dust storm in Afghanistan when absolutely no other pilot would dare to take the mission. She is a highly decorated combat hero. You will treat her with the utmost respect." The executive turned the color of chalk. He took another rapid step backward, stammering a pathetic, rambling apology that the general completely ignored. Savannah's mouth dropped open in pure shock. Patricia froze her champagne glass, trembling so violently that the expensive liquid spilled over her manicured fingers and onto the marble floor. Vanessa slowly lowered her phone, her face entirely pale as she realized she had just recorded a 4-star general defending the woman she was trying to destroy. The atmosphere in the room had completely flipped. The power dynamic shifted so violently that the elite guests were left gasping for air. I was no longer the plain delivery girl they could step on. I was suddenly the most respected person in the room, validated and honored by the very man they all worshipped and feared. I looked past the general straight at my husband. Cameron did not look proud. He did not look amazed or relieved by the revelation of my hidden depths. His face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. I had just effortlessly commanded the respect of the most powerful man in the room. I had instantly upstaged Cameron in front of his billionaire target and his investors. In Cameron's superficial, shallow world, that was an unforgivable crime. The shock on his face quickly hardened into a dangerous glare, setting the stage for the true betrayal that was about to unfold. The silence in the dining room stretched until it felt brittle enough to snap. General Mitchell held his salute, his eyes locked on mine with a mutual understanding forged in the fires of active combat. I lowered my hand, acknowledging the immense unspoken respect he had just bestowed upon me in front of the most powerful people in Washington. The surrounding crowd of executives and socialites remained absolutely motionless, their champagne glasses suspended in midair. Harrison, the billionaire CEO, whose approval Cameron craved like oxygen, was staring at me with sudden intense fascination. Savannah looked as though she had been physically struck. Patricia stood frozen by the grand archway, her face completely drained of color. But the most volatile reaction came from the man standing closest to the center of the spectacle. My husband. Cameron did not step forward to bask in the reflected glory of his wife. He did not smile, and he certainly did not ask the general how we knew each other. In Cameron's hyper-calculated world, every human interaction was a transaction, and I had just effortlessly stolen his most valuable currency, the spotlight. His face, usually arranged in a mask of effortless corporate charm, twisted into something ugly and unrecognizable. A flush of dark violent red crept up his neck, standing out sharply against the stark white collar of his tuxedo. He did not see a decorated hero standing before him. He saw a plain, embarrassing liability who had just upstaged him in front of his billionaire target. Before anyone could utter a single word to break the suffocating tension, Cameron lunged across the polished marble floor. His hand clamped down on my upper arm, his fingers digging into my skin with bruising, desperate force. "Move," he hissed, his voice a low, venomous scrape that barely registered over the ambient hum of the paralyzed room. He did not wait for my compliance. He jerked me backward, dragging me violently away from the general, away from the staring eyes of the elite guests, and straight out of the grand dining hall. We moved fast, pushing past the string quartet, who faltered in their playing as we stormed by. I did not struggle. I did not pull away, scream, or make a scene. In survival training, you are taught never to fight an aggressor until you understand their primary objective and have secured a tactical advantage. Let him lead, I told myself. Let him reveal his position. He shoved me through a set of heavy mahogany doors into a secluded, dimly lit corridor that connected the east wing of the estate to Patricia's private library. The contrast between the glittering, noisy ballroom and the suffocating silence of this hallway was instantaneous. Cameron released my arm with a violent shove, leaving me to catch my balance against the silk-papered wall. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving, his eyes wild with narcissistic fury. "You think you are so clever, do you not?" "Bethany," he spat, pacing like a caged animal in the narrow space. "You think you can waltz in here dressed like a maid and completely humiliate me in front of Harrison and his daughter?" I straightened my dress, feeling the cold, damp stain where Patricia had shoved the appetizer plates against my chest. "I humiliated you?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. "A 4-star general just commended my service record. You were the one standing with those men, actively trying to turn me into a punchline." Cameron let out a sharp, derisive laugh that echoed harshly off the high ceiling. "Service record? Do you honestly think anyone in that room gives a damn about your service record? This is the real world, Bethany. This is the big leagues." Harrison was seconds away from discussing the final terms of a billion-dollar merger. He was eating out of the palm of my hand. And instead the guest of honor is saluting my plain, pathetic wife like it is some ridiculous military parade. You ruined the most important night of my entire life. You sabotaged me on purpose just to get a pathetic few seconds of attention. I watched him carefully, letting his words wash over me. His ego was so deeply ingrained that he literally could not process the reality of what had just happened. He did not care about the lives I had saved in a combat zone. He only cared that the room's attention had shifted away from his grand performance. He stopped pacing and turned to face me fully, his eyes turning cold, hard, and terrifyingly calculated. But you are not going to ruin anything else, he declared, taking a step closer. I am completely done carrying dead weight. He did not ask for an explanation of my military past. He did not ask how I knew the general. Instead, he reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored jacket. He pulled out a thick, legal-sized envelope. The paper was crisp and heavy, completely incongruous with a festive celebration. He stepped forward and slapped the envelope hard against my chest, right over the grease stain left by his mother. Take it, he commanded. I did not raise my hands to catch it. I let the thick envelope slide off my dress and fall to the floor between us, landing with a soft thud on the Persian runner. Cameron sneered, looking down at it with absolute contempt. Those are divorce papers, Bethany, he said, his voice dripping with venom, along with a very specific, highly aggressive post-nuptial agreement. I had my legal team draft them weeks ago. I was going to wait until after the merger was finalized to hand them to you. But your little stunt tonight just accelerated my timeline. I want you out of my life immediately. I stared at him, my tactical mind instantly analyzing this new variable. Weeks ago, he had been planning this ambush while smiling at me across the breakfast table, while asking me to attend this party to support his career, while letting his mother treat me like garbage. What exactly am I supposed to be signing, Cameron? I asked, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. He mistook my icy calm for shock. He smiled, a cruel, triumphant expression spreading across his face. You are signing over that worthless little courier business of yours, he said smoothly. Apex, whatever you call it. You are signing it over to me, completely surrendering all rights and ownership. Consider it alimony. Consider it compensation for the massive embarrassment you have caused me tonight, and for the sheer amount of my valuable time you have wasted over the last few years. I maintained my neutral expression, but internally the pieces of the puzzle slammed into place. My little courier business. The exact same business he and his friends had just spent 10 minutes mocking as a dead-end gig. Now suddenly he was demanding it as compensation. The math did not add up. Cameron was incredibly greedy, but he was not stupid about assets. If he truly believed Apex Logistics was worthless, he would not be paying high-priced corporate lawyers to draft an aggressive post-nuptial agreement demanding full ownership of it. There was a hidden objective here, a tactical maneuver he thought he was executing flawlessly behind my back. Do not look so surprised, Bethany, he mocked, misinterpreting my silence as defeat. You have no leverage here. None. You are a glorified delivery driver standing in a room you do not belong in. You are going to sign that business over to me quietly, and you are going to walk away from this marriage without causing a single ripple in my professional life. If you do not comply, I will bury you in litigation until you cannot afford to buy groceries. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a menacing, triumphant whisper. And just so we are perfectly clear on how serious I am, do not bother trying to use the debit cards. I froze our joint bank accounts at noon today. Every single cent of our shared capital is locked down in a secure holding account that you cannot touch. I also had my security team change the smart locks on our house while we were driving here tonight. Your access codes have been permanently wiped. He stepped back, straightening his bow tie, looking incredibly pleased with his own ruthlessness. You have exactly nothing, Bethany. You have the cheap dress on your back and whatever is in that little purse of yours. You are locked out, you are broke, and you are entirely at my mercy. So pick up the envelope, take a taxi back to wherever your kind belongs, and sign the papers. You have 48 hours before I instruct my legal team to completely annihilate you. Cameron did not wait for a response. He turned on his heel, his posture radiating arrogant victory, and pushed through the heavy mahogany doors, marching back toward the glittering lights and clinking glasses of the ballroom to rejoin Savannah and secure his billionaire target. He left me standing completely alone in the dim hallway. I stood perfectly still, listening to the heavy doors click shut. I looked down at the thick manila envelope resting on the ornate rug. My husband had just discarded me. He had orchestrated a meticulous, legally binding ambush, meant to leave me destitute, terrified, and desperate. He expected me to break. He expected me to crawl away and surrender my life's work just to survive the week. I slowly crouched down and picked up the envelope. The paper was dense with legal jargon designed to intimidate a civilian. But I was not a civilian. I was a commander who had navigated hostile airspace, outmaneuvered insurgent forces, and managed highly classified supply chains that kept entire military operations breathing. Cameron's little corporate ambush was nothing compared to the threats I had faced in the service. He had shown his hand too early. By demanding Apex Logistics, he revealed that he knew it possessed some hidden value, even if he did not understand the full scope of my operations. He thought he was choking off my supply lines by freezing a joint bank account that held a few $1,000s of our household budget. He had absolutely no idea that my actual wealth, the tens of millions generated by classified Department of Defense contracts, was secured in heavily encrypted federal accounts that his high-priced divorce lawyers could never even locate, let alone touch. I slid the envelope into my purse. The cold, wet stain on my dress pressed against my skin, a physical reminder of the profound disrespect I had tolerated for far too long. Cameron wanted a war. He wanted to strip me of my assets and leave me with nothing. He had deployed his forces, cut off my civilian shelter, and issued his ultimatum. I took a deep breath, steadying my heart rate, feeling the familiar razor-sharp focus of combat take over my mind. Let him have his 48 hours of arrogance. Let him celebrate his billion-dollar merger tonight. He had just initiated combat with a woman who specialized in precise, catastrophic retaliation. I turned away from the ballroom doors and walked quietly toward the rear exit of the estate, stepping out into the cold, rainy night to begin marshaling my forces. The icy rain of the Washington night hit my bare shoulders the second I pushed through the heavy iron gates of Patricia's estate. The freezing downpour instantly soaked through the thin fabric of my plain black dress, washing away the lingering scent of expensive perfume and roasted duck from the dining room. I did not shiver. I did not look back at the glowing windows of the mansion where my husband was currently toasting to his new life without me. I kept my stride even and purposeful, walking down the slick asphalt until the glow of the estate faded into the dark tree line. A lone taxi was idling near the main intersection, its windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the storm. I opened the back door and slid onto the cracked vinyl seat. I gave the driver an intersection in a rundown industrial district of Alexandria, far away from the manicured lawns of Cameron's social circle. I paid him with a crisp $100 bill from the emergency cash reserve. I always kept zipped in the lining of my tactical tote bag. Cameron thought he had stripped me of my resources by freezing a civilian checking account, but a soldier never operates without a contingency fund. 20 minutes later, I was standing under the flickering neon sign of the Starlight Motel. The letters buzzed with a dying electrical hum, casting a sickly red glow over the cracked pavement. The lobby smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap bleach. I paid the night clerk for a room at the very end of the second-floor walkway, preferring a location with a clear line of sight to the stairs and multiple exit points. The room itself was dismal. The floral bedspread was faded, the carpet was worn thin, and the heater rattled violently when I turned it on. But to me, it was a perfectly adequate forward operating base. I locked the deadbolt, engaged the chain, and peeled off the wet, ruined civilian dress. I wrapped myself in a thin, scratchy towel and sat on the edge of the sagging mattress. For a fraction of a second, the sheer adrenaline of the night threatened to crash down on me. The sudden betrayal, the public humiliation, the freezing of my home and assets. It was a calculated psychological strike designed to induce sheer panic. I closed my eyes and let my military training override the civilian shock. I took a slow, deep breath, inhaling for 4 seconds, holding for 4, and exhaling for 4. It was the exact same tactical breathing technique I used during the worst night of my life over the mountainous deserts of Afghanistan. My mind snapped back to that blinding sandstorm in Al-Qaim. I was at the controls of a Black Hawk helicopter, carrying a dozen specialized infantrymen. The dust was so thick it turned the sky into a solid wall of swirling brown concrete. Visibility was absolute zero. Suddenly, a massive mechanical failure ripped through the main rotor engine. The cockpit instantly lit up with blaring red warning klaxons. The horrific screech of grinding metal drowned out the radio chatter. Beside me, my young co-pilot completely lost his nerve. He started shouting, his hands shaking violently over the controls, succumbing to the sheer terror of falling out of the sky. I did not shout. I did not panic. I slapped his hands away from the flight stick and locked my eyes on the artificial horizon gauge. In combat, panic gets you killed. Strategy is the only thing that keeps you alive. You do not focus on the ground rushing up to meet you. You isolate the variables you can control. I systematically shut down the failing engine, engaged the emergency protocols, and rode the terrifying momentum of the freefall into a textbook auto-rotation landing. We hit the desert floor hard, but we walked away without a single casualty. Sitting in this cheap motel room, I applied that exact same protocol to my husband. Cameron was not a man who broke my heart. He was a mechanical failure. I was a hostile variable that needed to be isolated, analyzed, and neutralized. I unzipped the false bottom of my oversized leather tote and pulled out a matte black tablet. It looked heavy and utilitarian, a far cry from the sleek consumer electronics Cameron favored. It was a secure encrypted terminal connected directly to the multi-million-dollar mainframe of Apex Logistics. He thought my company was a joke, a dead-end delivery gig. He had no idea that my proprietary routing software was currently used by the Department of Defense to track invisible supply lines across the globe. The software was designed to find anomalies in massive oceans of data, tracking phantom shipments and ghost accounts. I bypassed the motel's unsecured wireless network and connected directly to my encrypted satellite uplink. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the dark room. I began typing, my fingers flying across the digital keyboard with practiced speed. Cameron had given me a massive tactical advantage by initiating his ambush tonight. He assumed I would be spending the next 48 hours crying in a hotel room, calling lawyers I could not afford. He assumed I was blind. Instead, I aimed my classified logistics algorithm directly at his public and semi-private corporate filings. I bypassed the standard executive summaries and dug deep into the raw operational ledgers of his firm. Cameron was orchestrating a billion-dollar tech merger with Harrison's conglomerate. A deal of that magnitude required massive amounts of liquid capital to be shifted, audited, and staged in various holding accounts. But human beings are creatures of habit, and greedy men always leave a digital footprint. I set the software to run a rapid comparative analysis on the firm's expenditure reports from the last 90 days, cross-referencing them with the official merger budget allocations. Within 10 minutes, the algorithm flagged a massive, glaring discrepancy. It was a phantom routing number buried deep within a string of legitimate legal fees and corporate restructuring costs. Cameron had authorized a series of microtransfers, bleeding small, unnoticeable amounts of capital directly from his own firm's operational budget. But those microtransfers were all funneling into a single private offshore holding account, registered under a dummy corporation in the Cayman Islands. He was not just divorcing me. He was actively embezzling capital from the very company he was supposed to be leading into a merger. He was committing massive corporate fraud right under the noses of his own board of directors. But the question remained, what was he buying? A man like Cameron did not steal operational capital just to let it sit in an offshore bank. He needed it for a specific, immediate tactical purpose. I ran a trace on the outgoing expenditures from the Cayman account. The digital trail lit up like a flare in the night sky. 3 days ago, a wire transfer had cleared the holding account. It was sent to a highly exclusive appointment-only jeweler based in Geneva, Switzerland. I hacked the jeweler's digital invoice registry using a backdoor access code my logistics team used to verify high-value secure transports. The invoice materialized on my screen, detailing the exact purchase. It was a flawless, custom-cut, 5-carat diamond engagement ring. The price tag attached to the invoice was exactly $100,000. I stared at the glowing white numbers on the screen as the entire scope of Cameron's master plan clicked perfectly into place. The ring was not just an expensive piece of jewelry, it was the ultimate bribe. Cameron knew that the merger with Harrison's tech empire was fragile. He knew his own firm was bleeding money and masking it with aggressive accounting. I intended to use the stolen capital to buy that magnificent ring proposed to Savannah Harrison and legally bind himself to the billionaire's family. A marriage to the CEO's daughter would guarantee the merger went through, making Cameron utterly untouchable. He had embezzled from his own company to buy the bait for his trap. A cold, genuine smile touched my lips in the dark motel room. Cameron thought he had cornered a helpless housewife. He had no idea he had just handed a loaded weapon directly to a military strategist. I leaned back in the creaking motel chair, the harsh blue light of my encrypted terminal illuminating the water-stained ceiling above me. $100,000, stolen directly from his own firm's operating budget. But Cameron was a corporate parasite, not an apex predator. He lacked the imagination and the sheer nerve to execute a hostile corporate takeover without a massive structural safety net. The custom diamond ring was the bait for Savannah, but Harrison was a ruthless veteran billionaire. He would never hand over his daughter and the keys to his empire just because Cameron bought a shiny rock with embezzled funds. Harrison needed something functional, something infrastructural. I opened a secondary encrypted window on my terminal and initiated a deep dive into Harrison Technologies. What was the billionaire actually acquiring in this impending merger? I bypassed the heavily manicured public press releases and used my clearance to access the raw internal beta testing reports for Harrison's new global commercial drone delivery initiative. The data cascading down my screen painted a catastrophic picture. Harrison Technologies had the hardware. They had thousands of next-generation drones sitting idle in warehouses across the country. But their proprietary routing algorithm was a complete and utter disaster. Their automated units were crashing, failing to calculate shifting wind shear, and constantly violating restricted commercial airspaces. They were hemorrhaging capital on failed beta tests and facing massive federal fines. Harrison was desperate. I needed a flawless combat-tested aviation routing software to make his hardware viable, or his company's stock was going to absolutely tank by the fourth quarter. I toggled my screen back to my own secure server. The Apex Logistics Master Grid materialized a mesmerizing web of glowing green lines spanning the entire globe. Cameron and his arrogant friends thought I delivered cardboard boxes in battered vans. They were oblivious to the fact that those green lines represented heavily armored cargo planes, phantom supply chains, and classified military transports. My company moved black-budget assets for the Department of Defense. We transported advanced weaponry, encrypted servers, and classified personnel into the most hostile environments on Earth. But the true crown jewel of Apex Logistics was not the planes or the personnel. It was the proprietary routing software I had personally designed. After surviving that horrific sandstorm in Afghanistan, I spent 3 years coding an algorithm that could instantly calculate shifting weather patterns, hostile radar frequencies, and evasive flight paths in real time. The Department of Defense paid me tens of millions of dollars annually just for the licensing rights to use that specific code. It was the most advanced aviation routing software on the planet. I picked up the thick manila envelope Cameron had thrown at me in the hallway. I pulled out the aggressive post-nuptial agreement and spread the crisp pages across the faded floral bedspread. I grabbed a red pen from my bag and began marking the document with the brutal efficiency of a commanding officer grading a flawed battle plan. My eyes scanned the dense legal text until I found the exact paragraph hidden deep on page 42. It did not just demand the physical assets of my courier business. It specifically demanded the irrevocable transfer of all intellectual property source codes and proprietary algorithms registered under my name. The breath caught in my throat as the sheer calculated malice of his plan crystallized in the dim motel room. Cameron was not demanding my business out of petty spite. He was not trying to take it as alimony to punish me for ruining his dinner party. He had planned this for weeks. He knew Harrison's drone program was failing. He knew Harrison desperately needed an aviation routing algorithm to save his company. Cameron had somehow discovered that I owned the patent to the exact software Harrison required. The entire puzzle locked together flawlessly. Cameron's own firm was bleeding money. He had embezzled the operating capital to buy Savannah's ring, but the board of directors would eventually notice the missing funds. He needed this merger to go through immediately, to bury his financial crimes in the absolute chaos of corporate restructuring. But Harrison would not merge with a failing firm. So Cameron decided to steal my software. He was going to force me to sign over my intellectual property, strip me of my life's work, and hand my proprietary algorithm to Harrison as a billion-dollar bargaining chip. It was the ultimate corporate Trojan horse. The rain lashed heavily against the single-pane window of the cheap motel room. The harsh wind rattled the loose glass, a stark reminder of the physical exile my husband had just imposed on me. He had locked me out of my own beautiful home and frozen my checking account, hoping the sudden discomfort and the terrifying fear of poverty would force my hand. He wanted me cold, scared, and desperate. I looked around the dismal room, noting the peeling wallpaper and the scent of stale smoke. I had slept in freezing mud pits in enemy territory, with nothing but a tactical blanket and a loaded rifle. This rundown room felt like a luxury suite compared to the combat zones that forged me. A wave of cold realization washed over me. This was not a sudden reaction to my interaction with General Mitchell. The general's salute had merely bruised Cameron's fragile ego and forced him to move faster. The post-nuptial agreement, the offshore accounts, the custom diamond ring. This profound betrayal had been meticulously constructed over months. Every time Cameron kissed my forehead before leaving for the office, every time he smiled and asked me how my little delivery business was doing, he had been actively calculating how to rip it away from me. He had looked at his wife and seen only an asset to be liquidated for his own advancement. I thought I was just a naive civilian wife who would sign anything to avoid a messy, highly publicized divorce. He assumed I did not understand the dense legal jargon buried in the post-nuptial agreement. He genuinely believed he had completely outsmarted me. I let out a low, dark laugh that sounded foreign even to my own ears. Cameron had made a fatal tactical error. He had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of my software. My algorithm was not a commercial civilian app you could simply copy and paste onto a corporate tech server. It was classified military technology. It was bound by the strict laws of the International Traffic in Arms Regulations and heavily monitored by the federal government. Any unauthorized transfer of the source code to an unvetted civilian tech company constituted a severe breach of national security. If Cameron actually managed to acquire my software and present it to Harrison, he would not be handing over a golden ticket to save their merger. He would be handing over a massive federal indictment. But I could not just sit in this damp motel room and wait for him to trip the wire. I needed to ensure that his trap snapped shut on his own neck with inescapable catastrophic force. I needed to let him believe he was winning right up until the exact moment of total annihilation. I opened a secure encrypted comms channel on my terminal connecting directly to my lead military liaison at the Pentagon. I rapidly drafted a highly classified directive, initiating a sudden unannounced compliance audit on all Apex Logistics proprietary source codes. By triggering the federal audit, I was placing a digital tripwire around my intellectual property. The moment anyone attempted to transfer the licensing rights without my direct biometric authorization, the system would immediately lock down and alert federal authorities. I powered down the encrypted terminal and packed it securely back into the false bottom of my tote bag. I walked into the tiny, dingy bathroom and splashed freezing water on my face. The woman looking back at me in the cracked mirror was not a discarded, broken wife. She was a CEO holding a weapon that could effortlessly level a corporate empire. I dried my face, stepped back into the main room, and lay down on the sagging mattress. I did not need to run. I did not need to hide or beg for my house keys back. I was going to give Cameron exactly what he wanted. I was going to play the part of the terrified, submissive wife. I would let him parade his new fiancé around town. I would let him finalize his fraudulent merger. I would let him walk right up to the absolute edge of ultimate victory. Tomorrow the real war would begin. The morning light filtering through the cheap curtains was harsh, but the motel room still smelled of damp carpet and stale coffee. I woke before my alarm, my internal clock permanently set to military time. I reached for my civilian smartphone resting on the chipped nightstand. The device was vibrating violently, practically dancing across the cheap wood veneer. I expected a barrage of legal threats from Cameron, or a fake apology engineered by his crisis management team. I did not expect a digital firing squad. My screen was choked with hundreds of notifications. They were not from my husband. They were from civilian acquaintances, local neighborhood group members, women from the country club who had previously tolerated my presence, and even distant relatives. The preview texts were venomous, disgusting. How could you lie about something like that? You belong in a psych ward. Stolen valor is a crime, Bethany. I sat up, the thin motel sheet falling away from my shoulders. I opened the primary social media application on my phone and immediately understood the source of the attack. My sister-in-law Vanessa was staring back at me from the screen. She was sitting in her pristine, softly lit sunroom, wearing minimal makeup to convey a sense of raw vulnerability. Her eyes were artificially wide and glistening with manufactured tears. The caption below her video was a masterclass in character assassination. The heartbreaking truth about my brother's marriage. When mental illness turns into stolen valor and extortion. I tapped the screen to play the video. Vanessa let out a shaky, perfectly timed sigh before speaking directly into the camera. She claimed she was making this video because the truth needed to be told to protect her family from a dangerous, unstable individual. She painted a tragic picture of Cameron, the devoted, successful husband who had spent years trying to get psychiatric help for his deeply troubled wife. Then the video cut to the footage she had recorded last night in the dining room. But it was not the actual event. Vanessa had heavily edited the clip. She had muted the general's booming voice and cut out the exact moment he commended my service record. Instead, the video only showed me standing rigidly at attention, saluting an older man who looked confused in the edited context. She had spliced in a voiceover claiming I was having a delusional episode in the middle of a billionaire's private dinner party. Vanessa's voice dripped with fake sympathy as she delivered her lethal blow. Bethany has never served a day in her life, Vanessa lied smoothly to her millions of followers. She runs a failing local delivery service and has always been jealous of my brother's massive success. Last night she snapped. She put on this bizarre military performance, completely faking a combat record to embarrass Cameron. When Cameron finally told her he could not take the lies anymore, she demanded his entire corporate fortune and threatened to destroy his reputation. Stolen valor is an insult to real veterans, and attempting to extort my family is a crime. We are heartbroken, but we will not be blackmailed. The video had already amassed 2 million views. The comment section was a feeding frenzy of public outrage. People who had never met me were calling for my immediate arrest. Women I had helped organize charity drives with were posting lengthy paragraphs about how they always knew something was fundamentally wrong with me. They were tearing apart my plain clothes, my quiet demeanor, and my lack of social media presence as proof of my supposed sociopathy. Cameron had not just frozen my bank accounts. He had unleashed his sister to obliterate my civilian reputation. This was their standard operating procedure. I remembered a Thanksgiving dinner 4 years ago when Patricia had accidentally backed her luxury SUV into a parked car. Instead of taking responsibility, the family had closed ranks, paid off a few strategic local contacts, and successfully blamed the accident on a teenage valet driver who subsequently lost his job. In their world, reality was completely subjective. Truth belonged to whoever had the largest platform and the deepest pockets. They believed they could simply dictate my reality to the world and force me to submit. My phone buzzed again in my hand, pulling my attention away from the digital slaughter. A new text message had arrived. This one did not come through the standard cellular network. It popped up on my encrypted tactical messaging app, a secure channel reserved strictly for high-level military communications. The sender ID simply read M1, General Mitchell. I opened the secure message. The general did not waste time with pleasantries or civilian coddling. The text was crisp, furious, and radiating absolute authority. Captain, My aides flagged a viral video currently circulating on civilian networks. The individual claiming you have fabricated your service record is committing severe defamation and insulting a decorated officer of the United States Armed Forces. This is entirely unacceptable. I have the Department of Defense Public Affairs Office on standby. Give me the green light. We will instantly release your unclassified commendation records, your Silver Star citation, and a direct statement from my office confirming your tactical deployments. We will crush this influencer into absolute dust and issue a federal cease and desist before noon, awaiting your command. I stared at the glowing text. A single word from me and General Mitchell would deploy the entire public relations machinery of the United States military to obliterate Vanessa's entire career. The DoD would release the unclassified summaries of my combat drops. They would publicly verify that I was not a delusional housewife, but a highly decorated pilot who had saved American lives under heavy enemy fire. Vanessa would be exposed as a malicious liar on a global scale. Cameron's carefully constructed narrative of the victimized husband would instantly collapse. The temptation to clear my name, to watch them scramble and burn in the harsh light of undeniable federal truth, was a physical ache in my chest. But I forced myself to zoom out. I pulled my perspective away from the immediate sting of the insult and looked at the entire battlefield. If the general released my records right now, Cameron would instantly realize the true nature of my background. He would realize that Apex Logistics was not just a delivery company, but a federal defense contractor. He would understand that the proprietary software he was currently trying to steal to save his merger with Harrison was highly classified military technology. If he knew that, he would immediately back away. He would stop the theft, hide his embezzlement tracks, and pivot to a different strategy. He would survive. I did not want Cameron to survive this. I wanted him to commit entirely to his own destruction. Vanessa's video was not a setback. It was a massive, unforeseen tactical advantage. By publicly accusing me of stolen valor and framing me as a broke, delusional extortionist, the family was establishing a permanent documented record of their own malicious intent. They were digging a massive hole, convinced they were burying me. I needed them to keep digging until the walls were too high for them to ever climb out. I opened the keyboard on my encrypted app and typed my reply to the general. Negative, General. Stand down all DoD public affairs assets. Do not release my records. Do not issue a statement. Acknowledge receipt. The reply came back almost instantly. Acknowledged, Captain. But I strongly advise against letting this stand. They are attempting to destroy your character. I smiled a cold, calculating smile at the screen. I typed my final response. Let them talk, General. Let them scream it from the rooftops. They believe they are winning a public relations war. They have no idea they are walking blindly into a federal trap. Every lie they tell today exponentially increases their legal and criminal liability tomorrow. If we correct them now, they will retreat. I need them to commit. Let them dig their grave deeper. I will supply the dirt. I locked the secure application and tossed the phone onto the bed. The smear campaign was brutal, but it was purely psychological. It was noise. I walked over to the small laminate desk where my matte black tactical laptop sat waiting. I booted up the terminal and connected to my proprietary logistics network. Cameron thought I was currently weeping over internet comments, paralyzed by the hatred of women I barely knew. He thought his sister had successfully neutralized me. But while they were busy playing games on social media, I was actively monitoring the digital perimeter of my software. I pulled up the real-time compliance audit I had initiated the night before. The trap was armed. The federal tripwires were completely invisible, buried under millions of lines of code. I spent the next 3 hours mapping out the exact structure of Cameron's corporate network. I needed to know exactly how he planned to transfer my intellectual property once he believed he had forced me to sign the post-nuptial agreement. I found the backdoor channels his IT team used for secure file transfers. I analyzed the specific digital handshakes required to move proprietary algorithms from a civilian server into a corporate holding vault. Cameron was moving fast. He had already set up a staging server labeled Project Apex, specifically designed to receive my source code the moment I surrendered it. I was so incredibly eager to steal my life's work and hand it to Harrison that he was ignoring basic cybersecurity protocols. He was leaving his entire corporate network wide open, completely exposed to the very algorithm he was trying to capture. My civilian phone buzzed again from the bed. I walked over and glanced at the screen. It was a text message from Cameron. I hope you saw Vanessa's video, Bethany. You are a global laughingstock. Everyone knows exactly what you are now. You cannot show your face in this city ever again. The clock is ticking. Sign the business over to me today, and I will have Vanessa take the video down. Fight me, and I will make sure you never work again. You have nothing. Submit. I read the text twice, analyzing the sheer arrogance dripping from every word. He was leveraging his sister's defamation as a direct extortion tactic. It was perfectly documented digital blackmail. He was handing me the rope he would hang himself with, tying the knot and offering it to me on a silver platter. I did not reply to his text. I turned my phone on silent, threw it into my bag, and walked back to my terminal. I had $1 billion trap to spring, and I was not going to let a spoiled influencer and a desperate corporate thief distract me from the mission. Let them celebrate their viral victory. They were celebrating on a minefield, and I held the detonator. The morning sun pierced through the thin motel curtains, casting a harsh light over the worn carpet. I did not linger in the depressing room. I packed my tactical tote, ensuring my encrypted terminal was securely hidden beneath the false bottom, and checked out without a word to the clerk. I needed to establish my physical presence at the office. Cameron would expect me to hide. I was going to do the exact opposite. My civilian workspace was located in a drab concrete industrial park on the outskirts of Alexandria. It was a decoy, a perfectly mundane storefront designed to deflect any unwanted attention away from the highly classified military logistics network I actually managed. The sign above the glass door simply read, Apex Logistics, in faded blue vinyl lettering. The front room consisted of a scratched laminate reception desk, a pair of uncomfortable waiting chairs, and a heavy-duty industrial shredder. Behind a reinforced steel door lay the secure server room, but to anyone walking off the street, it looked exactly like the failing dead-end delivery business Cameron believed it to be. I unlocked the front door, flipped the sign to open, and brewed a pot of bitter black coffee. I sat behind the laminate desk, opening my civilian laptop to review mundane local shipping invoices. The trap was already set on the digital front. Now I just had to manage the human variables. I knew Cameron would not come himself. He was too cowardly to face me in the daylight without his corporate audience. He would send his proxies to do the dirty work. I did not have to wait long. At exactly 10 in the morning, a sleek silver Porsche SUV pulled up to the curb outside my storefront. The vehicle was entirely out of place among the rusted delivery vans and delivery trucks of the industrial park. The heavy glass door of my office swung open with unnecessary force. A gust of cold wind blew in, carrying the sharp scent of expensive floral perfume. My mother-in-law, Patricia, marched into the small reception area. She was dressed in a pristine white cashmere coat and carrying a designer handbag that cost more than a year of rent for most people in this zip code. Right behind her was Vanessa. My sister-in-law was wearing oversized sunglasses indoors and holding her latest smartphone tightly in her manicured hand, undoubtedly preparing to record another out-of-context interaction for her viral smear campaign. They stood in the center of the scuffed linoleum floor, looking around the modest office with undisguised, absolute disgust. "So this is it," Patricia sneered, running a gloved finger along the edge of the waiting room chair. "This is the grand empire you were so desperate to defend last night. It smells like diesel exhaust and failure." I did not stand up. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, keeping my posture completely relaxed. "I am working, Patricia," I said, my voice perfectly level. "If you require specialized freight transport, you can fill out an intake form online. If not, you are trespassing." Vanessa let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "She thinks she is a real CEO, Mom. It is honestly just sad. I bet she does not even have enough money in the bank to buy lunch today since Cameron cut off her access." Patricia stepped up to my desk, towering over me with a look of supreme, arrogant authority. "We are not here to play your little games, Bethany," she declared. "Cameron was entirely too generous with you. He is currently finalizing the most important corporate merger of his life, and he does not have the time or the patience to deal with a hysterical, destitute ex-wife dragging his name through the mud. You embarrassed our entire family last night. You disrespected me. You disrespected Savannah. And you proved exactly why you will never belong in our world." I set my coffee mug down. I let her speak, knowing that every word she uttered was just another tactical error. "Cameron instructed his legal team to obliterate you," Patricia continued, her voice rising with vindictive pleasure. "He is going to tie you up in litigation for the next decade. He is going to take every single asset you possess and leave you completely bankrupt. But because we are decent, civilized people, we have decided to offer you a graceful exit." Patricia opened her designer handbag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She slammed it down onto my scratched laminate desk with a loud, aggressive smack. I looked down at the paper. It was a cashier check. The amount written across the center was $10,000. "That is charity, Bethany," Patricia said, her tone dripping with toxic condescension. "$10,000 is more than this pathetic little garage is worth, and it is certainly more than you deserve. You are going to take that check right now. You are going to sign the non-disclosure agreement my son sent you. You are going to hand over the full legal rights to Apex Logistics, and you are going to walk away quietly. If you take the money, you can disappear and start over somewhere appropriate for your social class. If you refuse, Cameron will completely destroy you." Vanessa stepped closer, raising her phone slightly. "Just take the buyout, Bethany," she chimed in, her voice adopting that fake, sympathetic tone she used for her followers. "You have to know you lost. Everyone saw my video. The whole internet knows you are a fraud trying to extort my brother. If you try to fight this in court, my followers will make sure you are publicly ruined. Just take the money and leave Cameron alone." I sat perfectly still, absorbing their coordinated assault. They truly believed they held all the power. They thought $10,000 was a massive sum to a woman they perceived as a broke, desperate delivery driver. They thought the threat of civilian litigation and social media gossip would terrify me into surrendering proprietary military software worth tens of millions of dollars. The sheer, staggering ignorance of their strategy was almost fascinating to witness. I looked at the check sitting on my desk. $10,000. Cameron was trying to buy classified Department of Defense technology for the price of a used sedan. I slowly reached out and picked up the crisp check. I held it by the edges, inspecting it carefully. Patricia smiled, a cruel, victorious smirk spreading across her face. She thought I was admiring the money. She thought she had won. "You are making the right choice," Patricia said, smoothing the front of her cashmere coat. "I will tell Cameron to have his lawyers draft the final transfer of ownership documents by this afternoon. Make sure your things are packed and out of his house by tomorrow." I did not say a word. I kept my eyes locked on Patricia as I shifted my chair slightly to the right. I extended my arm, hovering my hand directly over the heavy-duty industrial shredder sitting beside my desk. Patricia's victorious smile faltered. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice suddenly sharp. I hit the power button on the shredder. The machine roared to life with a loud, grinding mechanical hum. Without breaking eye contact with my mother-in-law, I fed the $10,000 cashier check directly into the steel teeth. The machine snatched the paper, chewing it into thousands of tiny, unreadable confetti strips in a fraction of a second. Vanessa gasped, lowering her phone in genuine shock. Patricia slammed her hands down on my desk, her face turning a violent shade of red. "Are you completely insane?" she shrieked, the sound bouncing off the concrete walls. "That was $10,000. That was your only lifeline, you stupid, arrogant girl." I turned off the shredder. The sudden silence in the room was deafening. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the desk. My tactical assessment was complete. The enemy had fully committed to their offensive, and they had left their flanks entirely unprotected. "I do not want your charity." "Patricia," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register that commanded the room. "And I do not want Cameron's buyout. You came into my office expecting a surrender. You are not going to get one. You can take your non-disclosure agreement, and you can tell your son to burn it. I am not signing over my company. Not today, not ever. Patricia was hyperventilating, her chest heaving with pure rage. You have absolutely no idea what you are doing, she snarled, pointing a trembling finger at my face. You think you can defy us. You think you can humiliate my son and keep this pathetic garbage dump of a business. I will personally make sure you are blacklisted from every single bank in this state. I will call every member of our social circle and ensure that you are treated like a pariah. You will not be able to secure a loan, rent an apartment, or find a single client in Washington. We will completely ruin you. We are going to destroy your life, Bethany. Vanessa added, her voice trembling with anger. You are going to be living on the street by the end of the month. I stood up slowly, letting my full height intimidate them. The icy calm of a combat veteran radiated from my posture. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. Get out of my office, I commanded. The absolute authority in my tone made both women instantly take a step backward. Tell Cameron that if he wants my company, he will have to come and take it from me himself, but remind him that he is entirely out of his depth. Now leave before I have you both removed for trespassing. Patricia stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. She had never been spoken to with such absolute unyielding disrespect. She grabbed Vanessa by the arm, her manicured fingers digging into the fabric of her daughter's coat. You are going to regret this for the rest of your miserable life, Patricia seethed. They turned and stormed out of the office, the heavy glass door slamming shut behind them with a violent crash that rattled the front windows. I watched the silver Porsche speed away from the curb, peeling out aggressively into the industrial street. I remained standing for a moment, letting the silence of the decoy office wash over me. The opening skirmish was officially over. Cameron had deployed his family to execute a psychological strike, and they had failed completely. Now it was my turn to return fire. I walked over to the reinforced steel door at the back of the room, unlocked it, and stepped into the secure server vault. The air conditioning hummed loudly, keeping the massive encrypted servers cool. I bypassed my civilian laptop and picked up the secure red phone mounted on the wall. This device bypassed all commercial cellular networks, connecting directly to my federal liaisons via heavily encrypted satellite relays. I dialed a classified direct line to my primary contact at the Pentagon's Defense Logistics Auditing Division. The line clicked, and a stern male voice answered immediately, requiring my specific biometric and vocal passcode. I provided my clearance codes flawlessly. Captain Rhodes, the federal liaison, answered, his tone shifting to complete professionalism. How can the department assist you today? Initiate a Priority 1, Covert Financial Compliance Audit. I ordered, my voice cold and precise. Target is Cameron Rhodes and his primary corporate holding firm. Cross-reference his internal operating ledger against the Cayman Islands offshore account data. I am transmitting to your secure server right now. Understood, Captain, the liaison replied. The sound of rapid typing echoed over the secure line. What are we looking for exactly? Massive corporate embezzlement, I stated. He is siphoning operating capital to secure a fraudulent merger with Harrison Technologies. I want a full trace on all stolen funds. Do not alert the Securities and Exchange Commission yet. I want your team to build the federal indictment quietly. Map his entire financial network, lock down the evidence, and prepare to freeze his corporate assets the moment I give the final strike command. The trap was set. The federal government was now quietly hunting my husband. Cameron thought he was fighting a divorce battle over a civilian delivery company. He had no idea he had just declared war on the military-industrial complex. The retaliation arrived exactly 24 hours later, carried through the front door of my decoy office by a nervous-looking process server in a cheap suit. He practically threw the thick manila envelope onto my scratched laminate desk before backing out of the door, as if he expected me to detonate. I did not flinch. I picked up the heavy stack of legal documents and broke the official seal. Cameron had unleashed his corporate attack dogs. The legal filing was a masterpiece of aggressive civilian litigation. It was an ex parte injunction granted by a local county judge who likely shared a country club membership with my husband. The dense legal jargon spanned 40 pages, but the core directive was simple and brutal. Cameron had successfully petitioned the civil court to immediately freeze all public-facing commercial banking assets operating under the name Apex Logistics. His lawyers framed the injunction as an emergency protective measure to prevent the dissipation of marital assets during our impending divorce proceedings. They argued that because I had shredded Patricia's buyout check, I was acting erratically and posed an immediate flight risk with corporate funds. It was a standard corporate rating tactic designed to suffocate a smaller entity by cutting off their oxygen supply. In the civilian business world, cash flow is absolute king. If you freeze a small company's operating accounts, they cannot pay their vendors, they cannot make payroll, and they cannot keep the lights on. Within a week, the targeted business usually collapses entirely, forcing the desperate owner to the negotiating table on their knees. Cameron was executing a textbook hostile takeover using the family court system as his personal weapon. Right on cue, my civilian smartphone vibrated against the desk. I did not need to guess the sender. Cameron was too arrogant to let his lawyers do all the talking. He wanted to deliver the killing blow himself. I opened the message and read his gloating words. I warned you not to play games with me, Bethany. Your business accounts are officially locked. You cannot write a check, you cannot pay your rent, and you cannot buy a tank of gas for those pathetic delivery vans. I have completely choked your cash flow. The $10,000 offer is off the table. You have exactly 48 hours to sign the post-nuptial agreement and hand over the intellectual property rights to your routing software. If you refuse, I will let the injunction stand until you are totally bankrupt and begging me for grocery money. Do not test me again. Submit. I read the text a second time, analyzing the sheer, unadulterated delusion radiating from every single syllable. He genuinely believed he had me trapped. He believed he was holding a knife to my throat. I set the phone down and turned my attention to my cheap civilian laptop. I opened a standard web browser and logged into the local credit union portal associated with the public face of Apex Logistics. A bright red banner immediately flashed across the top of the screen, confirming that a judicial hold had been placed on the account. I looked at the frozen balance. It was exactly $4,212. It was my petty cash fund. It was the decoy account I used exclusively to pay the industrial park rent, the electricity bill for the storefront, and the bi-weekly invoices for the terrible bulk coffee Patricia had complained about. Cameron was paying his elite legal team $500 an hour to aggressively freeze a checking account that held less money than he spent on a single bespoke Italian suit. I closed the laptop and let out a quiet breath of amusement. The power dynamic in this war was so deeply skewed that Cameron could not even comprehend the battlefield he was standing on. He was playing a game of local checkers while I was orchestrating a global tactical strike. I stood up from the reception desk, locked the front door of the storefront, and walked back into the heavily air-conditioned server vault. I bypassed the civilian hardware entirely and sat down at my encrypted tactical terminal. I engaged the biometric scanners, pressing my thumb against the glass reader and leaning in for the retinal scan. The system verified my identity, and the true financial grid of Apex Logistics materialized across my 4 monitors. My real operating capital was not sitting in a vulnerable civilian credit union waiting to be seized by a local divorce judge. My assets were securely entrenched within the heavily fortified financial networks of the United States Department of Defense. Apex Logistics functioned as a cleared federal contractor, holding top-secret clearance and managing black-budget logistical movements. Our primary funding flowed directly through secure federal ledgers bound by the stringent protocols of the National Security Act and Title X of the United States Code. A civil family court judge possessed absolutely zero jurisdiction over classified federal defense contracts. Cameron's high-powered corporate lawyers could file injunctions until their fingers bled, but they could not touch my actual money. They could not even perceive it. Attempting to freeze a Department of Defense operational account using a local county court order was like trying to stop a runaway freight train with a piece of wet tissue paper. The federal banking system protecting my assets would not even register the civilian injunction as a valid request. If Cameron's lawyers somehow managed to dig deep enough to even locate the routing numbers for my federal accounts, their inquiry would instantly trigger an automated national security lockdown. They would be flagged by the FBI for attempting to access classified military funding structures. My husband believed he had cut off my oxygen supply. In reality, he had simply pinched a broken plastic straw while I was breathing perfectly filtered air from a boundless oxygen tank. I looked at the glowing green lines indicating my available operational capital. The balance sat comfortably in the high eight figures, consistently replenished by automatic federal wire transfers for the continuous licensing of my proprietary aviation routing algorithm. The very algorithm Cameron was desperately trying to steal to save his failing merger with Harrison Technologies. I picked up my civilian phone intending to delete Cameron's text message, but I stopped. I decided to leave it exactly as it was, unread and unanswered. Ignoring him was the most devastating psychological weapon I could deploy. Cameron thrived on control and reaction. He expected me to panic. He expected a frantic phone call, a tearful apology, or a desperate plea for mercy. Silence would completely unnerve him. It would force him to wonder why his ultimate checkmate had not produced a single sound of distress. I tossed the civilian phone into my bag and turned my full attention back to the encrypted terminal. I had actual work to do. A priority notification was flashing in the corner of my primary monitor regarding a sensitive cargo drop scheduled for the Eastern Mediterranean. One of my Phantom supply planes carrying a payload of highly classified encrypted drone components for the Navy was facing a sudden severe weather anomaly off the coast of Cyprus. The commercial weather satellites were failing to predict the rapidly shifting wind shear, exactly the kind of atmospheric chaos that was currently causing Harrison's commercial drones to crash and burn during their beta tests. I engaged my proprietary routing software. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the standard automated protocols and taking direct manual control of the algorithm. I fed the raw atmospheric data into the system, calculating barometric pressure drops, thermal updrafts, and the specific weight capacity of the armored cargo plane. The software processed millions of data points in a fraction of a second, instantly generating a flawless, evasive flight path. I transmitted the new coordinates directly to the pilot via the secure satellite uplink, guiding the heavy aircraft smoothly through a narrow corridor of stable air, entirely avoiding the destructive turbulence. The operation took less than 12 minutes. I secured the payload, protected a $50 million federal asset, and ensured the safety of a highly trained flight crew. I leaned back in my tactical chair, staring at the clean telemetry data confirming the successful maneuver. This was my reality. This was the level of absolute precision and staggering responsibility I managed every single day. And my husband genuinely believed I was going to surrender all of this, surrender the most advanced aviation routing software on the planet, because he froze $4,000 in a decoy checking account and threatened to uninvite me to his country club dinners. The sheer disproportion of our respective power levels was almost tragic. Cameron was a man who measured his strength by his ability to intimidate local bank managers and silence his critics with expensive corporate legal jargon. He was a bully, accustomed to terrorizing civilians who had no means to fight back. He had never faced an opponent who operated entirely outside the boundaries of his influence. He had never faced an adversary whose entire existence was classified. I opened a secondary window on my terminal, pulling up the covert compliance audit I had initiated on Cameron's corporate holding firm. The federal team at the Pentagon was moving with terrifying efficiency. They had already mapped the entire structure of his domestic accounts and were actively tracing the millions of dollars he had embezzled to purchase Savannah's diamond ring and finance his fraudulent legal maneuvers. The data streams confirmed that Cameron was actively bleeding his own company, dry, desperately trying to hold his crumbling facade together long enough to secure the Harrison merger. I was so focused on destroying me that he had completely ignored his own vulnerable perimeter. He had left his corporate treasury exposed, and the federal government was quietly, methodically cataloging every single financial crime he had committed over the past 2 years. I checked the 48-hour deadline Cameron had aggressively demanded in his text message, 48 hours until he promised to initiate my total ruin. I smiled a cold, razor-sharp smile in the dim light of the server vault. I would give him his 48 hours. I would let him sit in his glass corner office checking his phone every 5 minutes, waiting for my desperate surrender. I would let him savor the illusion of total victory. I would let him believe he was a corporate god, right up until the exact second the federal trap snapped shut and severed his kingdom at the neck. The next morning broke cold and brilliantly clear. I left the drab industrial park behind, navigating my nondescript sedan onto the southbound interstate, heading toward Virginia. Cameron's artificial 48-hour countdown was steadily ticking away in his mind, but my schedule was dictated by an entirely different authority. I bypassed the gleaming glass and steel corporate towers of downtown, where men like my husband played their petty games of wealth and perception. My destination was a sprawling, brutalist concrete complex nestled deep within a heavily forested sector of Arlington. It bore no corporate logos. There were no manicured lawns or valet attendants. The perimeter was secured by a 10-foot-high reinforced steel fence, hydraulic anti-ram barricades, and heavily armed military police personnel patrolling with tactical rifles. I approached the primary checkpoint. I did not roll down my window to hand over a driver's license. The automated scanners read the encrypted transponder embedded in my vehicle chassis. A biometric camera mounted beside the gate scanned my face through the windshield. The heavy steel barricades sank smoothly into the asphalt and the gate slid open. I drove into the belly of the beast. This was the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency Logistics Annex. This was where the United States government planned the movement of its most lethal and secretive assets. I parked in my designated underground bay and walked toward the primary elevator bank. 2 armed guards checked my identification before allowing me to enter the reinforced steel car. The elevator did not go up. It descended 3 floors beneath the bedrock, plunging me into a subterranean command center immune to electromagnetic pulses and civilian surveillance. General Mitchell was waiting for me in Conference Room Delta. He was not alone. The room was populated by 3 high-ranking officials from the Department of Defense Acquisitions Division and 2 federal attorneys specializing in national security law. The long matte black table was devoid of the excessive catered breakfasts and silver coffee pots that Cameron required for his morning meetings. There were only encrypted tablet devices and stark, unyielding fluorescent light. The general stood as I entered, offering a crisp nod of respect. He did not mention Vanessa's viral video or the bizarre civilian smear campaign currently dominating local social media. In this room, civilian gossip was entirely irrelevant. We were here to discuss the successful Mediterranean cargo drop and the immediate future of Apex Logistics. Captain Rhodes, the general, began, his voice echoing slightly against the acoustic paneling. Your manual override and real-time recalibration during yesterday's atmospheric anomaly saved a $50 million payload and kept our personnel out of hostile waters. The routing algorithm performed flawlessly under catastrophic weather conditions. The Pentagon brass has reviewed the telemetry data. They are done with beta testing. We are ready to move forward with full systemic integration. One of the defense attorneys slid a thick leather-bound folio across the table toward me. I opened the cover. The document inside was not a standard vendor renewal. It was a sweeping multi-year federal expansion contract. The Department of Defense was officially classifying Apex Logistics as a Tier 1 strategic partner. They were acquiring the exclusive military licensing rights to integrate my proprietary routing algorithm into every single next-generation combat drone and tactical cargo transport across 3 separate branches of the armed forces. The financial compensation attached to the contract was staggering. It guaranteed 9 figures annually for the next 7 years. But the money was secondary to my true objective. I flipped to the specific section detailing the legal classification of the software. I had instructed my own federal liaisons to draft this specific clause weeks ago, anticipating Cameron's inevitable greed. I want absolute confirmation on the compartmentalization protocols, I stated, looking directly at the lead defense attorney. If I sign this document, I need to know exactly how the source code is classified under federal law. The attorney adjusted his glasses and tapped his tablet. The language is ironclad, Captain. Upon execution of this contract, The core routing algorithm and all associated intellectual property are immediately designated as classified military technology under the International Traffic in Arms Regulations. It will hold a top-secret clearance designation. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. And what happens if a civilian entity, without federal clearance, attempts to acquire, possess, or utilize this source code? The attorney did not hesitate. Any unauthorized transfer, possession, or viewing of this code by an unvetted civilian corporation constitutes a severe breach of national security. It falls directly under the Espionage Act. If a civilian were to somehow acquire this algorithm without express written authorization from the Department of Defense, they would be in possession of stolen classified military assets. The federal government would immediately seize their entire corporate infrastructure. The executives involved would face federal indictment and decades in a federal penitentiary. The company itself would be liquidated and permanently blacklisted from ever operating within the United States. A deep, profound sense of satisfaction settled into my bones. This was the kill shot. Cameron was currently holding a fraudulent post-nuptial agreement, demanding that I sign over the exact source code sitting in this leather folio. He fully intended to take my software and present it to Harrison Technologies to save his failing merger. He thought he was stealing a lucrative civilian application. He had absolutely no idea that he was actively conspiring to steal top-secret military technology. By signing this contract, I was weaponizing my intellectual property. I was turning the algorithm into a toxic radioactive asset. The moment Cameron tried to hand it over to Harrison, he would infect the billionaire's entire tech empire with stolen federal secrets. Harrison was a ruthless businessman, but he was not suicidal. If he discovered that Cameron had brought the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the Pentagon crashing down upon his company, he would not just cancel the merger. Harrison would personally destroy Cameron to save himself. Cameron's ultimate bargaining chip was now a federal death sentence. I picked up the heavy steel pen resting beside the folio. I did not hesitate. I signed my name with sharp, precise strokes, binding my software permanently to the United States military. I flipped through the remaining pages, initialing the security agreements and the classification mandates. Every stroke of the pen erected a massive, impenetrable fortress around my life's work. Cameron's expensive corporate lawyers and his aggressive local injunctions were completely powerless against the full weight of federal defense law. "Excellent work," Captain General Mitchell said, as the attorney collected the signed documents. "We will begin the system-wide integration protocols immediately. Your liaison will transmit the new operational parameters to your secure terminal by 1800 hours. I stood up and shook the general's hand. "Thank you, General. I will be ready." I left the subterranean command center and rode the elevator back to the surface. Walking out into the bright Virginia sunlight, I felt lighter than I had in months. The cold, oppressive fear that Cameron had tried to instill in me was entirely gone. He had locked me out of my home. He had frozen my petty cash. He had unleashed a vicious viral smear campaign to destroy my civilian reputation. He had done everything in his power to make me feel small, weak, and utterly defeated. But he had failed. He was a man playing with matches, completely oblivious to the fact that I was standing in a room full of gasoline holding a lit blowtorch. I climbed into my sedan and turned on my civilian smartphone. It instantly began vibrating violently, downloading a fresh wave of notifications. There were dozens of missed calls from random local numbers, reporters attempting to dig into Vanessa's viral accusations. There were hundreds of new hateful comments on my dormant social media profiles. And sitting at the very top of my screen was a new text message from my husband. 24 hours left. Bethany Cameron's message read, "The bank confirmed the freeze is holding. You have zero cash flow. My lawyers are drafting the final transfer papers right now. Vanessa's video just hit 3 million views. You are completely cornered. Stop being a stubborn idiot and sign the post nut before I take everything and leave you with nothing." I stared at the text message. He was so intensely focused on my civilian decoy account that he had completely ignored the broader landscape. He thought he had me backed into a corner, but he was the one standing on the trap door. I started the engine and pulled out of the classified military facility. I was not going to reply to his text. I was going to let him continue his arrogant countdown. Tomorrow, the 48 hours would expire. Tomorrow, Cameron would expect me to crawl into his corner office completely broken and sign away my company. I would go to his office. But I would not be crawling. I would walk into his glass tower carrying the full devastating weight of the federal government right behind me. The drive back to my decoy office was peaceful. The frantic, chaotic noise of Cameron's smear campaign felt entirely disconnected from my reality. Let Vanessa cry on camera. Let Patricia threaten to ban me from her meaningless country club. Let Cameron gloat over freezing $4,000. They were fighting a shadow. The real Bethany was untouchable. The real Apex Logistics was fortified by the strongest military in the world. I arrived back at the industrial park and unlocked the front door of my storefront. The air smelled of cheap laminate and diesel fuel. I walked past the heavy-duty shredder that had devoured Patricia's pathetic bribe and entered the secure server vault. I needed to verify the covert compliance audit on Cameron's firm. I accessed the secure channel and reviewed the latest data streams pouring in from my Pentagon liaisons. The financial map of Cameron's embezzlement was a thing of terrifying beauty. The federal auditors had successfully bypassed his corporate firewalls and tracked every single dollar he had stolen. They had documented the fake invoice, the offshore transfers, and the direct deposits into Savannah's diamond jeweler. The indictment was fully constructed. The federal prosecutors were simply waiting for my command to strike. Cameron believed tomorrow was the day he would finally conquer me. He believed he was going to take my life's work and use it to elevate himself to the ranks of the ultra-wealthy. Tomorrow he would learn the hardest lesson of his life. You do not bring a corporate lawyer to a tactical military strike. I powered down my monitors and locked the vault. The board was set. The pieces were locked in place. The ultimate destruction of Cameron Rhodes was no longer a possibility. It was a mathematical certainty. All I had to do now was wait for the sun to rise and watch him burn. The neon sign of the Highway Motel flickered with a harsh crimson glow, casting long, distorted shadows across the peeling wallpaper of my room. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, the springs groaning softly under my weight. My tactical laptop was securely stowed away in the false bottom of my tote bag. For all intents and purposes, I was exactly what my husband desired me to be. A discarded, terrified civilian wife, completely isolated and utterly crushed by the sudden overwhelming force of his corporate legal team. I had spent the last 2 hours sitting in silence, letting the reality of the impending federal strike settle into my bones. The trap was locked. The Department of Defense was quietly amassing an insurmountable mountain of financial evidence against Cameron. All I had to do was maintain my cover. A sharp, aggressive pounding on the thin wooden door shattered the quiet of the room. The knocking was erratic, entirely lacking the measured rhythm of law enforcement or the hesitant tap of motel housekeeping. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my plain civilian sweater, and walked toward the door. I checked the peephole. It was not a process server. It was not one of Cameron's overpriced corporate attorneys. It was Savannah. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. My husband's mistress stood on the stained concrete walkway, looking like a glossy magazine cutout pasted onto a backdrop of urban decay. She wore a tailored ivory trench coat that cost more than this entire motel. Franchise knee-high suede boots and oversized designer sunglasses despite the lack of sunlight. The custom diamond ring Cameron had purchased with embezzled corporate funds sparkled violently on her left hand. The heavy, cloying scent of her expensive floral perfume instantly overpowered the smell of stale smoke and damp carpet radiating from my room. She did not wait for an invitation. Savannah shoved the door wide open, forcing me to take a step backward and march directly into the center of the cramped room. She ripped off her sunglasses and looked around with an expression of profound, unadulterated disgust. She dragged a manicured finger across the top of the chipped television stand and wiped it on a tissue from her designer handbag. "This is absolutely pathetic," Bethany Savannah sneered, turning to face me. "Cameron told me you were hiding in some dump off the interstate, but I honestly did not believe you could sink this low. You look terrible." I immediately altered my posture. I let my shoulders slump forward, pulling my arms inward to make myself appear physically smaller. I widened my eyes, projecting a carefully calibrated mixture of shock exhaustion and deep intimidation. In the theater of war, deception is your greatest shield. I needed Savannah to believe she was the apex predator in this room. "What are you doing here, Savannah?" I asked, keeping my voice soft and slightly unsteady. Cameron froze my accounts. "I cannot even afford to hire a lawyer to review his paperwork. You have taken everything. What else could you possibly want from me?" Savannah laughed. It was a sharp, brittle sound completely devoid of actual humor. She opened her handbag and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents bound by a heavy black clip. She tossed them onto the sagging bed. "I want your signature, Bethany," she demanded, crossing her arms over her pristine coat. "Cameron is being far too generous by giving you 48 hours to think about this. I do not have 48 hours to wait. You are holding up my entire life over some pathetic failing delivery vans, and I am entirely sick of it." I looked at the documents on the bed, playing the part of the overwhelmed victim. "I cannot just sign away my business," I whispered, forcing a slight tremor into my hands. "It is all I have left. Cameron knows that. It is a garage full of cardboard boxes and minimum wage drivers." Savannah snapped, pacing the narrow space between the bed and the door. "You are being completely delusional. Do you have any idea what you are actually interfering with right now? I am supposed to be booking the grand ballroom at the Four Seasons for our wedding reception. The deposit is due by the end of the week. Cameron cannot transfer the funds to my wedding planner because his accounts are currently being scrutinized by his legal team until this messy divorce is finalized. You are literally ruining my dream wedding because you are too stubborn to admit that you lost." I kept my eyes downcast, staring at the stained carpet. "You are ruining my life over a wedding venue deposit?" I asked, letting a note of desperate pleading leak into my tone. "It is not just a venue deposit." Bethany Savannah fired back, her voice dripping with extreme condescension. She stepped closer to me, eager to flaunt her perceived superiority. "You are so small-minded. You have absolutely no idea the level of business Cameron is dealing with right now. He is stepping up into the major leagues. He is merging his firm with my father's empire. Do you even understand what Harrison Technologies is? My father is a billionaire. Cameron is securing our family's legacy, and he needs a clean financial slate to do it." I remained perfectly still. I knew exactly what Harrison Technologies was, and I knew exactly how desperately they needed my classified military routing algorithm to save their failing drone delivery initiative. But Savannah did not know that. She was a spoiled heiress who viewed corporate mergers as glamorous accessories to her social status. Her arrogance was a massive, glaring vulnerability, and she was begging me to exploit it. "Cameron already has his own company," I murmured, feigning ignorance. "Why does he need to take mine to merge with your father?" "Because your little routing software is the final piece of the puzzle," Savannah said, rolling her eyes dramatically. "My father's commercial drone program is having some minor navigation issues. Cameron realized your delivery company uses some basic routing app, and he promised my father he would acquire it to streamline the merger. It is a technicality, Bethany, a minor asset transfer. But my father is a perfectionist. He refuses to sign the final merger documents until Cameron officially controls the software and transfers it to the Harrison servers." Savannah took a deep breath, her frustration boiling over into reckless, catastrophic bragging. She wanted to crush me. She wanted to prove exactly how insignificant I was in the grand scheme of her new glamorous life. And in her desperate need to exert dominance, she abandoned every single principle of operational security. "You cannot stop this," Bethany Savannah declared, pointing a sharp acrylic nail at my chest. "It is already done. Tomorrow night, exactly at 8 o'clock, the private executive dining room on the top floor of the Apex Tower downtown. My father is flying his entire corporate legal team in from New York on his private jet. Cameron is bringing his board of directors. They are officially signing the merger and transferring the software rights directly onto the Harrison mainframe. The champagne is already ordered. We are going to be the most powerful tech family in the state. And you are going to be sitting in this disgusting motel room crying over a business that never mattered." My heart beat a steady, slow rhythm against my ribs. Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. The private executive dining room at the Apex Tower. Savannah had just handed me the exact tactical coordinates, the precise timeline, and the complete roster of targets for the final strike. She had gift-wrapped Cameron's corporate execution and handed it to me simply because she wanted to brag about her wedding plans. I needed to ensure she left this room feeling completely victorious. I needed her to report back to Cameron that I was utterly broken, incapable of mounting any kind of defense. I let my knees buckle slightly, sagging against the wall beside the bathroom door. I brought my hands up to my face, covering my eyes, as if I were trying to hold back a flood of devastated tears. "Please, Savannah," I sobbed, forcing my voice to break and hitch. "Please, I just need a little more time. I do not have a lawyer. I do not have any money to fight this. If I sign those papers, I am giving up everything I built. Tell Cameron I am begging him. Just give me until tomorrow to read through the contract. I will not fight him. I just need to understand what I am signing away." I peeked through my fingers. Savannah was standing over me, looking down with an expression of supreme victorious satisfaction. She had successfully bullied her rival into submission. She felt like a queen. "You have until tomorrow afternoon," Bethany Savannah said, her voice dripping with icy triumph. "Cameron's lawyers will send a courier to collect the signed documents at 3 o'clock sharp. If you do not hand over the signed post-nuptial agreement, he is going to proceed with the asset seizure and leave you with nothing. Do not make me come back to this filthy place." She turned on her designer heel, grabbed the handle of the motel door, and pulled it open. She paused in the doorway, looking back at me, huddled against the wall. "You really should have known better than to fight us," she sneered. "You were never in our league." The door slammed shut behind her, rattling the cheap frame. I remained against the wall for exactly 30 seconds, listening to the sharp clicking of her boots fade away down the concrete walkway. I heard the distinct, powerful roar of her luxury sports car engine starting in the parking lot, followed by the screech of tires as she sped away toward her pristine suburban life. The moment the sound of her engine faded into the distant highway traffic, the illusion vanished. I dropped my hands from my face. My posture instantly straightened, returning to the rigid, disciplined stance of a military officer. My eyes were entirely dry. My breathing was perfectly calm. The terrified, broken civilian wife was gone, replaced by a tactician who had just been handed the keys to the enemy stronghold. I walked over to the bed, picked up the thick stack of legal documents Savannah had thrown on the blankets, and dropped them directly into the trash can next to the desk. I did not need to read Cameron's demands. His entire corporate existence was about to be seized by the federal government. I retrieved my encrypted tactical laptop from beneath the mattress and booted up the secure terminal. I bypassed the civilian interfaces and immediately opened a direct classified communication channel to General Mitchell and my federal auditing liaison at the Pentagon. I began typing rapidly, my fingers flying across the keys with absolute precision. "Target acquisition confirmed. Cameron Rhodes and Harrison Technologies will be conducting an unauthorized transfer of classified Department of Defense intellectual property tomorrow at 2000 hours. Location confirmed as the private executive dining room, top floor, Apex Tower. Harrison's corporate legal team and Cameron's board of directors will be present." I paused, staring at the glowing green text on the black screen. I was authorizing the deployment of federal agents to seize a billionaire's corporate assets. I was initiating the total destruction of my husband's life. I felt absolutely no hesitation. I typed the final command: "Prepare federal strike teams. Do not move until the exact moment of the intellectual property transfer. I want them caught in the active possession of stolen military technology, awaiting final operational green light." I hit send and closed the terminal. Savannah wanted to celebrate her victory at the Apex Tower tomorrow night. I was going to make sure it was a party they would never forget. I left the decoy office before dawn the following morning. The air was crisp and completely devoid of the suffocating humidity that had choked the city for the past 3 days. I drove back to the Arlington Defense Facility, bypassing the standard security checkpoints and swiping my federal credentials at the subterranean executive access tunnel. This was not a remote terminal check-in. Today required physical presence. Today we were marshalling the squadron. The sensitive compartmented information facility was buried 4 floors beneath the bedrock. It was a room entirely stripped of civilian comforts. There were no panoramic city views, no leather executive chairs, and no catered espresso bars. The walls were lined with lead and acoustic dampening foam. The single heavy steel door sealed with a pneumatic hiss that completely isolated us from the outside world. This was a room designed for waging war. General Mitchell was already standing at the head of the matte black tactical table. Flanking him were three of the most brilliant and ruthless legal minds the United States military had ever produced. Colonel Vance was a forensic accounting specialist who had spent 20 years dismantling international terror financing networks. Major Reyes and Captain Hayes were senior prosecutors from the Judge Advocate General Corps specializing in corporate espionage and treason. They were not divorce attorneys, they were federal predators. I took my seat at the opposite end of the table, placing my encrypted tablet on the cool metal surface. The digital warboard embedded in the center of the table illuminated, casting a harsh blue glow across our faces. Captain Rhodes, the general, began, his voice sharp and commanding in the deadened acoustics of the vault. Your authorization for the deployment of federal strike teams has been processed and approved by the highest levels of the Pentagon and the Department of Justice. We have full operational jurisdiction. We are treating this as an active attempt by an unauthorized civilian entity to acquire classified military technology. I nodded, giving the general my full attention. Have we finalized the financial autopsy on Cameron and his corporate holdings? Colonel Vance stepped forward, tapping his own tablet to bring up a staggering web of financial data on the central screen. It was a chaotic, beautiful map of Cameron's profound arrogance and criminal negligence. Red lines connected offshore accounts to domestic shell companies, highlighting dozens of fraudulent transactions in real time. Your husband is not just a corporate raider. Captain Colonel Vance stated, his tone laced with professional disgust. He is a remarkably sloppy criminal. He knew the Harrison Technologies merger required him to show a massive reserve of liquid operating capital. Capital he simply did not possess. To bridge the gap, he began cannibalizing his own infrastructure. He siphoned millions from his employee pension funds, took out fraudulent leveraged loans using non-existent corporate real estate as collateral, and falsified 2 years of tax returns to make his company appear solvent to the Harrison auditing team. Major Reyes leaned forward, pointing to a specific cluster of bright red transactions isolated in the bottom quadrant of the screen. But his most fatal error was his sheer monumental hubris. He could not resist the urge to play the conquering king for his new audience. Reyes tapped a specific transaction log, enlarging it for the room to see. It was a wire transfer for exactly $2.4 million. We traced this specific sum, Colonel Vance explained, tracking the digital paper trail with a laser pointer. This money was originally part of a heavily monitored escrow account, specifically mandated by the Harrison merger agreement. It was supposed to be untouchable liquid capital, held in reserve to cover the initial integration costs. Cameron forged the signatures of his own board of directors, bypassed the escrow security protocols, and wired the money through a shell company registered in Delaware. From there, it went directly to a bespoke diamond jeweler in Geneva. I stared at the screen, feeling a cold wave of absolute vindication wash over me. The $2 million custom diamond ring Savannah had practically shoved in my face at the motel. The ring she had flaunted as proof of her ultimate victory over the pathetic, destitute wife. She was walking around wearing $2.4 million of federally documented wire fraud on her left hand. Cameron had stolen the money directly from his future father-in-law's merger escrow account, just to buy his mistress a shiny rock. The staggering depth of his stupidity was almost difficult to comprehend. We have established an ironclad chain of evidence, Captain Hayes added, sliding a thick physical dossier across the table toward me. We have him on 17 counts of federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and tax evasion. But those are just the appetizer. The main course is the intellectual property transfer. The screen shifted, displaying the massive multi-year federal expansion contract I had signed yesterday. The document legally binding my routing algorithm to the United States military was displayed in high resolution, with the top secret classification stamps clearly visible on every single page. Tonight at 2000 hours. Cameron intends to sign the final merger documents with Harrison Technologies. Reyes continued, outlining the legal kill box. In doing so, he will attempt to transfer the proprietary rights of the Apex logistics routing software into the Harrison corporate mainframe. He believes he is forcing you to surrender a civilian asset. He is entirely unaware that he is actively attempting to traffic top-secret Department of Defense architecture. The moment he executes that transfer, General Mitchell interjected, his voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly register, he violates the Espionage Act. He becomes an active threat to national security. And Harrison Technologies becomes an unwitting accomplice in the possession of stolen military secrets. I looked around the room, locking eyes with each of the officers. The sheer magnitude of the trap we had constructed was breathtaking. We were not just going to arrest Cameron. We were going to annihilate his entire existence. We were going to reduce his corporate empire to ash and ensure he spent the rest of his natural life staring at the concrete walls of a federal penitentiary. What is the operational timeline for the strike? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level, betraying none of the dark satisfaction blooming in my chest. General Mitchell hit a button on the console. A massive digital clock appeared on the main screen, counting down the hours, minutes, and seconds until 8 o'clock tonight. We move simultaneously across 4 separate fronts, the general explained, outlining the tactical choreography. At exactly 1955 hours, you will enter the private executive dining room at the Apex Tower. You will play your part. You will allow Cameron to present the final documents. You will let him believe he has achieved total victory. Colonel Vance picked up the briefing. At 1959 hours, Cyber Command will initiate a total systemic lockdown of Cameron's corporate banking network. Every single account, every offshore holding, every hidden shell company will be frozen and seized by the Treasury Department. Simultaneously, we will freeze the Harrison Technologies escrow accounts to prevent the merger funds from clearing. Major Reyes continued the sequence. At 2000 hours, exactly the moment Cameron signs the transfer agreement and attempts to initialize the software upload, the Department of Defense Cyber Warfare Division will intercept the data packet. The code will not reach the Harrison mainframe. Instead, the attempt will trigger a massive digital quarantine. The FBI White-Collar Crime Division is already positioned in plain clothes inside the Apex Tower lobby. United States Marshals will secure the perimeter of the building. The general looked directly at me. When the digital quarantine is triggered, you give the final physical signal. The strike teams will breach the executive dining room. We will secure the classified assets, arrest Cameron Rhodes on federal espionage charges, and seize every single piece of electronic hardware in that room. The Harrison legal team will be detained for questioning regarding their involvement in the attempted acquisition of military technology. It was a flawless, perfectly synchronized symphony of absolute destruction. Every flank was covered. Every escape route was blocked. Cameron had spent months plotting to ruin me, orchestrating a petty, cruel campaign of civilian harassment. He had used his family to bully me. He had used his mistress to humiliate me. He had used his lawyers to starve me out. He believed he was the ultimate predator in a corporate jungle. I was completely blind to the fact that he was nothing more than a minor annoyance standing in the crosshairs of a federal firing squad. We synchronize watches, General Mitchell commanded, stepping away from the digital board and raising his left arm. I lifted my wrist, looking at the heavy tactical watch strapped over my civilian sweater. Vance, Reyes, and Hayes did the same. The rhythmic ticking of the analog hands seemed to echo loudly in the deadened silence of the subterranean vault. It is exactly 0700 hours, General Mitchell stated. 13 hours until execution. 0700 hours confirmed. I replied, my voice sharp and decisive. The other officers echoed the confirmation, locking the timeline into absolute reality. The briefing was officially over. The planning phase was complete. There was nothing left to do but execute the mission and watch my husband walk blindly into the abyss. I gathered my encrypted tablet and stood up from the heavy black table. The former military advisors offered respectful nods, acknowledging the gravity of the impending operation. They understood the stakes. They understood that this was not just a legal maneuver. This was a surgical strike against a domestic threat. Captain Rhodes, the general, called out as I reached the heavy steel door. I paused and turned back to face him. Cameron Rhodes is going to realize very quickly that he made the most catastrophic mistake of his life, General Mitchell said, a faint, grim smile touching the corners of his mouth. Do not hesitate tonight. Do not offer him a single shred of mercy. He is an enemy of the state the moment his pen touches that paper. He will not receive any mercy. General, I promised, my voice cold and uncompromising. I am going to let him dig his own grave, and then I am going to bury him in it. I stepped out of the skiff and the heavy door sealed shut behind me. I rode the elevator back to the surface, shedding the tactical mindset of a federal contractor and preparing to don the mask of a broken, defeated wife one last time. I had 13 hours to perfect my performance, 13 hours to practice my tears, 13 hours until I walked into the apex tower and watched the man who tried to destroy me lose absolutely everything. I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan in the Pentagon parking lot for an extra 5 minutes, letting the crisp morning air clear my mind. The tactical briefing was over. The federal machine was in motion. Now I had to deliver my final performance to a husband who believed he held my entire world in the palm of his hand. I pulled my civilian laptop from my bag and connected to a secure mobile hotspot. I opened my standard commercial email account. The inbox was overflowing with aggressive legal threats from Cameron's corporate attorneys, each message more condescending than the last. I opened a new draft, addressed to the lead partner of his legal team. I typed slowly, ensuring every word dripped with the exact flavor of desperate resignation Cameron expected to see. I am writing to formally request a final mediation meeting, I typed, keeping my phrasing deliberately disjointed and submissive. I can no longer sustain this legal battle. My accounts are frozen, and I have no remaining options. I am prepared to sign the post-nuptial agreement and initiate the transfer of the routing software intellectual property. However, because I have no funds, I was only able to secure a pro bono legal advisor who is exclusively available this evening at 8 o'clock. We can meet at the Public Legal Aid Clinic in the South District. Please send the final documents there. I just want this to be over. I read the email twice. It was a masterpiece of manufactured defeat. It painted the exact picture Cameron craved. It showed a broken, destitute woman sitting in a depressing public clinic begging for the nightmare to end. I pressed send and drove away from the military facility, heading back to the highway motel for the final time. I did not have to wait long for the trap to spring. Less than an hour after I hit send, my civilian smartphone vibrated on the passenger seat. It was an email from Cameron's lead attorney confirming that 2 junior associates would be dispatched to the legal clinic at 8 o'clock sharp with the final execution copies of the transfer agreement. They instructed me to bring a valid government ID and reminded me that any further delays would result in immediate asset forfeiture. 5 minutes later, my phone vibrated again. This time it was a direct text message from Cameron. I parked the car in front of my motel room and opened the message. It is about time you realized you were entirely out of your depth. Bethany. His message read, the sheer arrogance practically bleeding through the digital screen. I told you that you could not win a war against me. You tried to play the smart, independent business owner, but you are exactly what you have always been. A small-minded girl running a pathetic garage operation. I will not be at your sad little meeting tonight. I have actual business to conduct. At 8 o'clock tonight, I will be standing in the executive dining room of the Apex Tower, signing a billion-dollar merger with Harrison Technologies and officially acquiring your software for a real company. My junior lawyers will collect your signature and process your surrender. Take whatever pitiful buyout they offer you and disappear. Savannah and I are moving on. I locked my phone and smiled. The bait was completely swallowed. By confirming the fake mediation meeting, I had successfully neutralized every single variable. Cameron was now absolutely convinced that I would be sitting in a drab fluorescent lit room on the opposite side of the city while he was popping champagne at the Apex Tower. He would not be looking over his shoulder. He would not be double-checking his security protocols. He would walk into that executive dining room completely blind and utterly defenseless. I walked into the motel room and immediately began packing. The clock was ticking steadily toward the 2000-hour strike time. I gathered my civilian clothes and shoved them into a duffel bag. I would not need them anymore. My phone buzzed a third time. It was a new voicemail. I engaged the speakerphone and tossed the device onto the bed as I continued to pack up my tactical hardware. Bethany, darling, my mother-in-law. Patricia's voice filled the small room, her tone dripping with toxic, triumphant sympathy. Cameron just told us the wonderful news. I am so relieved you finally decided to stop this embarrassing little charade. It takes a certain kind of maturity to admit when you have been completely bested. I know this must be very humiliating for you, but you really brought this entirely upon yourself. When you sign those papers tonight, I strongly suggest you use the buyout money to relocate to a different state. Savannah is going to be planning a very high-profile wedding, and we simply cannot have you lingering around the city, causing any unnecessary awkwardness. Do not bother calling us again. We consider this matter permanently closed. The voicemail clicked off. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. Patricia was so eager to twist the knife that she had completely blinded herself to the reality of her son's impending destruction. She genuinely believed her family was ascending to the absolute pinnacle of Washington wealth. She had no idea that her beloved son had just financed his new fiancée's diamond ring by committing federal wire fraud against a billionaire. A notification popped up immediately after the voicemail. It was an alert from Vanessa's public social media profile. I clicked the link out of pure tactical curiosity. Vanessa had posted a new video from the passenger seat of Cameron's luxury SUV. She was wearing a designer cocktail dress and holding a glass of sparkling water. "Hey guys!" She practically squealed into the camera, her face perfectly contoured and glowing with artificial light. "I just wanted to give a huge update. The toxic situation with my brother's crazy ex is finally over. She totally caved today. We are literally on our way to the biggest corporate celebration of the decade. My family is officially merging with Harrison Technologies tonight. It is so crazy how karma works, right? When you try to destroy good people, the universe just handles it. Anyway, I will be posting live updates from the Apex Tower Executive Suite later tonight. Stay tuned." I closed the application. Karma indeed. The afternoon stretched into the early evening. I utilized the remaining hours to transition out of the decoy persona I had maintained for the past 3 days. I showered in the cramped motel bathroom, washing away the scent of cheap soap and stale fear. When I stepped out, I opened the garment bag I had retrieved from my secure storage unit weeks ago. I dressed with meticulous military precision. I bypassed the plain civilian sweaters and faded jeans I had worn to play the part of a failing delivery driver. Instead, I put on a tailored charcoal gray suit cut from premium Italian wool. The fabric was immaculate, projecting sharp, absolute authority. I secured my hair into a tight professional twist, completely removing any trace of the frazzled, anxious woman Savannah had berated just a few hours ago. I slipped a discreet encrypted earpiece into my right ear, establishing a direct open communication line with the federal strike teams currently staging around the Apex Tower. "Testing comms," I said quietly, tapping the earpiece. "Comms verified," Captain Rhodes. General Mitchell's voice crackled instantly in my ear, cold and professional. "The perimeter is secure. FBI plainclothes units are positioned in the lobby and the underground parking structure. Cyber Command confirms they have a lock on Cameron Rhodes's banking network and the Harrison escrow accounts. We are holding for your physical arrival." "Understood, General," I replied, grabbing my tactical tote bag and walking out of the motel room for the final time, en route to target location. I drove through the city as the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the glass facades of the downtown corporate district. The streets were thick with evening traffic, but I felt entirely insulated from the civilian world. I was a precision instrument moving inexorably toward a designated target. I pulled my sedan into a public parking garage 2 blocks away from the Apex Tower. I did not want Cameron's private security detail recognizing my vehicle if they were monitoring the VIP entrance. I walked the remaining 2 blocks, blending seamlessly into the flow of corporate executives and high-powered lawyers leaving their offices for the evening. The Apex Tower loomed ahead of me, a soaring monument of glass and steel dominating the city skyline. It was the physical embodiment of everything Cameron valued: wealth, status, and absolute visual dominance. I approached the towering glass doors of the main lobby. Through my earpiece, I could hear the steady, calm chatter of the federal agents coordinating their positions. "Target 1 has entered the building," An agent reported, his voice smooth and detached. Cameron Rhodes is currently in the executive elevator, heading to the top floor dining room. Target 2. Savannah Harrison is accompanying him. The Harrison legal team is already in the room. I stepped through the revolving doors and walked into the cavernous marble lobby. To the untrained eye, it looked like a standard corporate evening. Security guards stood at the front desk checking identification badges. Executives mingled near the coffee shop. But I saw the hidden architecture of the trap. I saw the men in sharp suits reading newspapers on the lobby benches, their eyes constantly scanning the exits. I saw the women in professional attire standing near the elevator banks, their hands resting casually near their concealed holsters. Captain Rhodes' General Mitchell's voice sounded in my ear. The junior associates you requested have arrived at the decoy location. They are currently waiting in the legal clinic lobby. Cameron believes you are off the board. Perfect, I whispered, walking purposefully toward the VIP elevator bank. Let him enjoy the illusion for exactly 5 more minutes. I bypassed the standard security desk. My federal clearance codes were loaded onto a digital credential on my smartphone. I pressed the screen against the optical scanner guarding the private executive elevators. The scanner flashed a brilliant green, the heavy steel doors slid open and I stepped inside. I pressed the button for the top floor. The elevator shot upward smoothly, silently, carrying me towards the climax of a war Cameron never even knew he was fighting. He was sitting in a room right above my head, surrounded by billionaires and corporate lawyers, believing he had conquered the world. He was raising a glass of champagne to his own genius. I watched the floor numbers tick upward on the digital display. 50, 55, 60. The federal trap was fully primed. Cyber Command was holding their fingers over the execution keys, ready to freeze his entire stolen empire. The strike teams were stacked in the stairwells, holding their breath. 65. I adjusted the cuffs of my suit jacket and squared my shoulders. The doors chimed and slid open, revealing a plush, dimly lit corridor lined with expensive modern art. At the end of the hall, heavy double doors led into the private dining room. I could hear the muffled sound of laughter and clinking crystal echoing down the corridor. I walked toward the doors, my heels making no sound on the thick luxury carpet. It was exactly 1955 hours. The decoy meeting had officially begun across town. Cameron was entirely off guard. He was completely defenseless. I placed my hands on the brass handles of the double doors, taking one final deep breath. The time for deception was over. The time for absolute destruction had arrived. I pushed the doors open and walked into the room. To fully appreciate the look of utter devastation that would soon contort my mother-in-law's face inside that executive dining room, we must rewind exactly 6 hours earlier. While I was sitting in a subterranean military bunker, securing the absolute destruction of Cameron Rhodes, his mother and sister were busy celebrating their premature victory in the most predictable manner possible. They were shopping. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Patricia and Vanessa swept through the heavy glass doors of Maison de Luxe, an exclusive appointment-only designer boutique in the heart of Georgetown. They were not there to browse. They were there to acquire the visual armor required for a billionaire corporate signing gala. The boutique manager greeted them immediately, recognizing Patricia from her frequent, highly publicized spending sprees. They were ushered into a private velvet-lined viewing suite and handed crystal flutes of imported champagne. Patricia settled into a plush armchair, crossing her legs and waving a dismissive hand at the rack of standard designer dresses. "Bring us the reserve collection," she commanded, her voice echoing with supreme aristocratic entitlement. "My son is finalizing a massive corporate merger with Harrison Technologies tonight. We require garments that reflect our family's new financial bracket. I want to see the Parisian imports and bring my daughter your most exclusive diamond accessories." The sales associates scrambled to comply, practically falling over themselves to appease a woman they believed was about to tap into a billion-dollar fortune. As the staff paraded tens of thousands of dollars worth of silk, chiffon, and jewels into the private suite, Patricia and Vanessa reveled in their perceived triumph. "Can you imagine what Bethany is doing right now?" Vanessa asked, holding a shimmering silver gown up to the mirrored wall and admiring her reflection. She is probably sitting in that depressing little legal clinic right now, crying her eyes out because Cameron finally cut her off. Patricia took a slow, satisfied sip of her champagne. She brought it entirely upon herself, Vanessa. I tried to offer her a graceful exit with that $10,000 check, but she had to be dramatic and shred it. Now she gets absolutely nothing. She will be driving a delivery van for the rest of her miserable life, while we are summering in the south of France with the Harrisons. Now hand me that emerald necklace. It will perfectly complement my eyes for the press photos tonight. For 2 hours, they lived in a state of pure, unadulterated delusion. They selected a custom beaded gown for Patricia that cost $40,000. Vanessa chose a daring backless designer dress and paired it with a $25,000 diamond clutch. They piled the extravagant items onto the central viewing table, treating the boutique like their own personal closet. They felt invincible. They believed Cameron had successfully choked my cash flow and secured their permanent elevation into the elite ruling class. They approached the polished marble checkout counter with their heads held high. The boutique manager herself stepped up to handle the transaction, her fingers flying across the high-end point of sale terminal. The total came to exactly $89,400. Patricia smiled a tight, arrogant smirk and reached into her designer handbag. She pulled out a heavy black titanium centurion card, the ultimate symbol of limitless credit, and dropped it onto the marble counter with a loud, definitive clack. Put it all on this, Patricia instructed, adjusting the collar of her cashmere coat. The manager smiled professionally and slid the heavy metal card into the card reader. The machine processed for a moment. Then it let out a short, flat beep. The screen flashed a bright red error code. The manager's professional smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Rhodes," she murmured, keeping her voice discreetly low. "It appears the terminal is having trouble connecting with your provider. Let me just try running it one more time." She swiped the black card again. The machine beeped instantly. Declined. Patricia's posture stiffened. Her eyes darted toward the other wealthy patrons browsing in the main salon, suddenly paranoid that someone might have heard the humiliating sound of a rejected transaction. "There must be a glitch in your antiquated system." She snapped her tone, dropping its artificial sweetness. "Run it manually." "I am afraid it is a hard decline." Mrs. Rhodes, the manager, whispered, her demeanor shifting from fawning submission to cautious suspicion. "The bank has placed a total freeze on this account. Do you perhaps have an alternate form of payment?" Patricia's face flushed a violent shade of crimson. It was the deepest social embarrassment a woman of her standing could possibly endure. She snatched the black card off the counter and dug frantically into her wallet, pulling out a platinum Visa linked to her primary checking account. "Run this one," she hissed. "It is absolutely fine. Cameron is transferring millions today. The bank is likely just holding the large transactions for security verification." The manager swiped the platinum card. Declined. Vanessa stepped forward, rolling her eyes in dramatic annoyance. "Mom, stop embarrassing us. Their machine is obviously broken. Here, use my card. It is linked directly to the family trust." Vanessa handed over her premium credit card. The manager swiped it. The machine beeped a fourth time. Declined. The silence in the boutique was absolutely deafening. The other sales associates had stopped pretending to fold clothes and were openly staring at the Rhodes women. The illusion of their infinite wealth had shattered in the middle of a Georgetown luxury salon. Patricia snatched the cards back from the manager, her hands trembling with a mixture of profound humiliation and sudden spiking panic. "Hold these items in the back," Patricia commanded, pointing a shaking finger at the pile of expensive gowns. "I am going to call my wealth manager and sort out this ridiculous clerical error right now." She turned on her heel and stormed out of the main salon, pushing through the heavy glass doors and marching into the private cobblestone courtyard behind the boutique. Vanessa scurried after her, looking around anxiously to see if anyone was recording the meltdown. Patricia pulled out her phone and dialed the direct line to her senior bank manager, her thumb jabbing the screen with frantic aggression. "Richard, what on earth is wrong with your systems?" Patricia barked the second the line connected. "I am standing in Maison de Luxe, and every single one of my cards is declining. Unfreeze my accounts immediately. Cameron is closing the Harrison deal tonight, and I will not be humiliated over a security hold." There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. When the bank manager finally spoke, his voice was trembling and entirely devoid of its usual deferential tone. "Mrs. Rhodes, I did not authorize a security hold," Richard said, his voice echoing thinly over the cellular connection. "Your accounts are not frozen due to suspicious activity. They have been completely locked by our legal compliance division. A massive overdue debt has just been aggressively called in." Patricia stopped pacing. The cobblestone courtyard seemed to tilt beneath her expensive heels. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "What debt? I pay my minimums every month." "I am talking about the secondary mortgages on your estate, Mrs. Rhodes," the manager explained, tone turning grim. "I am talking about the heavily leveraged loans you took out to maintain your country club status and finance your lifestyle over the past 3 years. You used your home as collateral. Our system shows that your entire debt portfolio was quietly acquired by a private holding company several months ago. They became your primary creditor." "And who is this holding company?" Patricia shrieked, losing her grip on her aristocratic composure. "Tell them my son is merging with Harrison Technologies. Tell them they will have their money by tomorrow morning." "I cannot do that, Mrs. Rhodes," the manager replied. "The holding company is called Aegis Financial. 10 minutes ago, they executed an immediate default clause on your entire portfolio. They have legally frozen your personal assets, your checking accounts, your investment portfolios, and the deed to your house. They are demanding the total sum of your debt paid in full immediately. You have zero available capital, Mrs. Rhodes. You are officially bankrupt." Patricia dropped her phone. It clattered against the cobblestones, cracking the glass screen. She stood frozen in the courtyard, her breath catching in her throat as the reality of her total financial ruin washed over her. What Patricia did not know, what she could not possibly comprehend, was that Aegis Financial was not some faceless, ruthless corporate entity. Aegis Financial was a completely legally insulated shell company I had established 3 years ago, using my initial federal contracting bonuses. I had known for a long time that Patricia lived vastly beyond her means. She funded her aristocratic lifestyle entirely on toxic debt and heavily leveraged credit, maintaining the illusion of old money while secretly drowning in liabilities. When her primary lenders started getting nervous, I quietly purchased her debt portfolios for pennies on the dollar through Aegis. I became her primary creditor. She had been unknowingly paying me interest for 36 months. I owned the mortgage on her house. I owned the loans that paid for her country club dinners. I owned her, and I had written the default clauses myself. The exact trigger for calling in the total sum was entirely at my discretion. I had pushed the execution button right before I signed the Department of Defense contract. "Mom, what is happening?" Vanessa asked, grabbing Patricia's arm and shaking her slightly. "Did Richard fix it? Can we go buy the dresses now?" Patricia stared at her daughter, her mind violently rejecting the terrifying truth she had just been handed. Her ego was too massive to accept defeat. She could not process the fact that she was currently standing in designer clothes while legally possessing less money than a minimum wage delivery driver. She decided to protect her pride at the cost of her reality. She picked up her cracked phone and smoothed the front of her cashmere coat, forcing her trembling hands to be still. She pasted a rigid, terrifyingly fake smile onto her face. "It is just a clerical error," Patricia lied, her voice high and strained. "The bank's internal system flagged our accounts because of the massive influx of capital they are expecting from Cameron's merger tonight. It is an automated security protocol for billionaires, Vanessa. We are simply too wealthy for their standard system." Vanessa's face instantly relaxed, breaking out into a relieved, arrogant smile. "Oh my God, that is so annoying, but also kind of iconic. So what do we do about the dresses?" "We will tell the manager to hold them," Patricia stated, turning back toward the boutique doors. "I will have Cameron's office send a certified courier with a corporate check first thing tomorrow morning. We will just wear our current designer pieces to the signing tonight. It does not matter. Tonight is about Cameron's victory." They walked back into the boutique, heads held high, projecting an aura of untouchable supreme wealth. Patricia fed the boutique manager the exact same lie, blaming the declined cards on a billionaire security hold. She demanded the dresses be kept in the VIP suite and promised payment by morning. They swept out of Maison de Luxe, and walked down the cobblestones of Georgetown, entirely oblivious to the catastrophic reality of their situation. They were dead women walking. The financial noose had already been pulled tight, snapping their social standing and their economic survival in a single swift motion. They were heading to the apex tower expecting to celebrate a coronation. They had absolutely no idea they were walking directly into a federal slaughterhouse. The private executive dining room at the Apex Tower was a masterclass in aggressive corporate intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling glass offered a sweeping, unobstructed view of the Washington skyline, transforming the city into a sparkling carpet of light laid out beneath their feet. Heavy crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the massive mahogany boardroom table. The table itself had been cleared of its usual leather folios and replaced with silver trays of caviar imported champagne and the thick, pristine stacks of the Harrison Technologies merger contracts. Waiters in crisp white gloves moved silently along the edges of the room, ensuring that not a single crystal flute remained empty for more than a few seconds. Cameron stood at the absolute center of the room, absorbing the ambient worship of his inner circle like a sponge. He wore a custom-tailored tuxedo that cost more than a reliable car, his hair perfectly styled, his posture radiating the supreme confidence of a man who believed he had successfully conquered the world. Savannah clung to his left arm, posing for a private photographer she had hired to document their triumph. The stolen $2 million diamond sparkled viciously on her finger, a glittering monument to Cameron's federal wire fraud. Patricia and Vanessa were stationed near the floor-to-ceiling windows, holding court with several junior executives from the Harrison legal team. They were projecting an aura of untouchable generational wealth, completely masking the absolute panic that must have been eating them alive after their credit cards had violently declined all afternoon. They sipped their champagne and laughed loudly, projecting their manufactured superiority to anyone who would listen, pretending their financial foundation was not currently turning to dust. Standing opposite Cameron was Arthur Harrison. The billionaire tech mogul was not a man who smiled easily, but tonight he looked supremely satisfied. He was a ruthless pragmatist who viewed human beings entirely as disposable assets to be acquired or liquidated. He raised his crystal flute, tapping a silver spoon against the rim to command the attention of the room. Harrison praised Cameron for his aggressive business tactics, for doing whatever was necessary to secure the proprietary routing algorithm that Harrison Technologies desperately needed to salvage their failing commercial drone delivery program. Cameron preened under the praise. He bragged to the room that the software acquisition was a minor technicality, a simple, clean seizure from a failing local garage business, run by a woman who simply lacked the intellect to understand the true value of her own asset. He toasted to the future, to power, to his beautiful new bride, and to the crushing defeat of anyone who stood in their way. The heavy brass handles of the double doors turned simultaneously. The thick mahogany doors did not simply open. They were violently shoved apart, hitting the interior walls with a concussive thud that rattled the expensive artwork and stopped the ambient music dead. I walked into the room. I did not shrink. I did not apologize for the interruption. I moved with the precise, lethal grace of a military strike team commander executing a high-altitude combat drop. The transformation from the marginalized, mocked scapegoat to the untouchable CEO was absolute. The custom-tailored midnight blue executive suit hugged my shoulders like armor. The discreet silver starburst lapel pin caught the light from the chandeliers, broadcasting my classified federal authority. I was not alone. Flanking me on my right was General Mitchell in his full dress uniform, the heavy weight of his military commendations resting silently on his chest. Behind him marched Colonel Vance, Major Reyes, and Captain Hayes, their faces carved from absolute granite. Moving in perfect synchronization, behind the military brass, were 6 heavily armed federal agents wearing tactical vests emblazoned with the United States Department of Justice crest. They instantly fanned out, securing the exits and physically blocking the elevators. The room froze in a state of absolute suspended animation. The symphony of clinking crystal and arrogant laughter was instantaneously annihilated. Cameron stared at me, his mouth falling open, his eyes wide with a mixture of profound confusion and immediate spiking rage. The delicate baccarat flute slipped from his numb fingers. It hit the polished hardwood floor, shattering into 100 glittering pieces and sending a splash of vintage champagne across Savannah's designer heels. Savannah let out a shrill, offended shriek, jumping back and staring at the damp spots on her expensive silk shoes. She looked up at Cameron, expecting him to immediately fix the intrusion and punish the offender. Cameron recovered his voice, stepping forward and allowing his rage to override his non-existent survival instincts. He immediately fell back on his favorite tactic, loud, aggressive public humiliation. "What in the hell do you think you are doing here?" he bellowed, his face flushing a violent shade of red. He turned frantically toward the door, searching for the building security team that the federal agents had already neutralized in the lobby. "Security," he shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "Get this crazy broke ex-wife out of my building immediately." He turned back to Arthur Harrison, raising his hands in a frantic, placating gesture, desperately trying to control a narrative that had already slipped entirely out of his grasp. "Arthur, I am so sorry about this," Cameron pleaded, his tone dripping with manufactured condescension. "This is my delusional ex-wife. She is a complete nobody. Her pathetic little delivery business went bankrupt today, and she is staging this desperate, pathetic stunt to try and ruin my night. Just ignore her. The building guards will have her dragged out in a second." Patricia stepped forward, eager to support her golden child and assert her own perceived dominance. She scoffed loudly, looking me up and down with an expression of supreme disgust. "Bethany, you are completely humiliating yourself," Patricia sneered, crossing her arms over her incredibly expensive unpaid-for gown. "Who did you scam to rent that suit, because we all know your bank accounts are completely empty? Take your little Halloween costume and leave before Cameron has you arrested for trespassing." Vanessa actually pulled out her smartphone, hitting record and pointing the camera directly at my face. "Oh my God, you guys, my brother's crazy stalker ex-wife just crashed a billionaire corporate gala," Vanessa narrated to her non-existent audience, her voice sharp and brittle. "She literally hired fake security guards to try and look important. This is the saddest, most pathetic thing I have ever seen. I let them dig their graves." I stood perfectly still in the center of the room, letting Cameron's frantic, desperate shouting and Patricia's toxic insults echo off the glass walls. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself against their ridiculous, amateurish accusations. I simply let them look like unhinged, out-of-control liabilities in front of the very billionaire they were trying so desperately to impress. Arthur Harrison was not looking at Cameron. He was a man who understood the fundamental mechanics of power, and he was currently looking at the 4 high-ranking United States military officers standing in his private dining room. His eyes swept over the tactical vests of the federal agents securing the perimeter. Harrison stepped slowly away from Cameron, his eyes narrowing as he calculated the precise threat level of the situation. He realized instantly that this was not a domestic dispute. You do not hire actors to wear Department of Justice body armor. Cameron, entirely blind to the shifting dynamics of the room, tried to step directly into my personal space, attempting to physically intimidate me, as he had done behind closed doors for a decade. He raised his hand, pointing a sharp, aggressive finger directly at my face. "I told you to take the buyout and disappear, you stupid, worthless girl," Cameron snarled, his voice dropping to a vicious, threatening register. "You are going to sign the software transfer right now, or I am going to make sure you end up sleeping on the streets." General Mitchell did not say a word. He simply took one half-step forward, placing his imposing physical presence directly between me and my furious husband. The movement was smooth, completely effortless, and carried the unmistakable promise of absolute violence if Cameron advanced another inch. Cameron stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes darting up to meet the general's cold, predatory stare. The trap was sprung. The predator was cornered. General Mitchell did not raise his voice. He did not have to. His command presence sucked the oxygen out of the room. "Step back, Mr. Rhodes," the general ordered, his tone flat and unyielding. "You are currently interfering with a classified federal operation and attempting to intimidate a key defense contractor." Cameron blinked, his arm falling limply to his side. "Contractor," he stammered, looking from the general to me and back again. "She is a housewife. She runs a failing local delivery app. She is nobody." General Mitchell adjusted his cuffs, his gaze burning a hole directly through Cameron's skull. You are catastrophically misinformed. The woman standing before you is the founder majority shareholder and chief executive officer of Apex Defense Logistics. She is the sole architect of the neural routing algorithm currently powering the United States military drone fleet. You will address her with the respect her position and her federal clearance demand. The silence that followed was absolute. Arthur Harrison, the billionaire tech mogul who had been watching the exchange with narrowing eyes, suddenly turned the color of wet ash. He looked at Cameron and then looked at the heavily armed federal agents securing the doors. Harrison was a ruthless predator, but he was not stupid. He instantly recognized the scent of a federal trap. You told me you held the exclusive proprietary rights to the routing software, Harrison said, his voice dangerously low, dropping to a lethal whisper. You stood in my office and guaranteed that your company owned the intellectual property outright. You told me the original developer was bought out and legally silenced. Cameron opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. He turned to me, his arrogant facade entirely shattered, replaced by a naked, desperate panic. Bethany, what did you do? He choked out. I did exactly what I told you I would do, I replied, stepping out from behind the general and approaching the massive mahogany table. I secured my assets. I reached into my sleek tactical tote bag and pulled out a thick, heavy dossier bound in red federal classification tape. I dropped it directly onto the polished wood. It hit the table with a heavy, definitive thud, sliding across the smooth surface and stopping right in front of Arthur Harrison. That is a complete, unredacted financial audit of Cameron's corporate accounts, I announced, my voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. You will find that my husband did not simply lie to you about possessing the proprietary rights to my software. He also systematically embezzled over $2 million from his own company's operating budget over the past 4 months. He drained his liquidity to maintain the illusion of extreme wealth. I turned my gaze toward Savannah, who was standing frozen near the window, the spilled champagne drying on her designer shoes. I used those stolen corporate funds to purchase that ridiculous $2 million diamond currently sitting on his new bride's finger, I stated, pointing a sharp manicured finger at Savannah's hand. He financed his wedding, his cars, and his lifestyle with stolen money, hoping this merger would cover up the massive bleeding crater in his accounting department. He is not a billionaire, Mr. Harrison. He is a thief living on borrowed time. Savannah let out a strangled gasp, clutching her left hand to her chest, as if the ring had suddenly caught fire. She stared at Cameron, her eyes wide with terror and betrayal. Cameron, you promised me you were rich, she wailed, her shrill voice echoing against the glass walls. You said the money was yours. Shut up, Savannah. Cameron hissed frantically, trying to grab the red folder from the table. Arthur, do not look at that. It is fabricated. She is a vindictive, crazy woman trying to frame me. General Mitchell slammed his heavy hand down onto the dossier, pinning it to the table before Cameron could snatch it away. This audit was conducted and verified by the Forensic Accounting Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Mr. Rhodes, the general stated coldly. I highly suggest you stop speaking before you incriminate yourself further. I stepped right up to the edge of the mahogany table, looking directly into Arthur Harrison's pale, furious face. As the sole legal owner of the Apex Defense Logistics routing algorithm, I am officially invoking federal defense protocols. I declared, projecting absolute, unshakable authority. I am vetoing any unauthorized use, transfer, or sale of my proprietary software. This technology is now a classified asset of the United States Department of Defense. If you sign that merger agreement tonight, Mr. Harrison, you will be actively purchasing stolen federal property. You will be participating in corporate espionage and treason. Arthur Harrison did not hesitate. He did not ask for clarification. He understood exactly how close Cameron had just dragged him to the edge of a federal indictment. Harrison snatched up the thick stack of expensive merger contracts he had been preparing to sign and ripped them entirely in half, throwing the shredded paper directly into Cameron's face. The deal is dead, Harrison roared, his voice shaking with absolute rage. You lied to me, you arrogant, stupid little boy. You nearly brought the entire weight of the Justice Department down on my company. I will make sure you never work in this sector again. I will personally see to it that you are ruined. Harrison turned on his heel, marching furiously toward the exit. Savannah, realizing her entire future as a billionaire's wife, had just evaporated, instantly panicked. She lunged forward, grabbing Harrison's expensive suit jacket, desperately trying to stop him from leaving. "Mr. Harrison, wait!" she shrieked, her carefully curated elegance completely forgotten. "You can still buy it from me. I am his wife. I am entitled to half of everything. Just give me the money directly." Harrison stopped, looking down at her, clutching his jacket with an expression of profound, utter disgust. He grabbed Savannah by her upper arm, peeling her off his suit, and physically dragged her toward the double doors. "You are married to a federal criminal, you pathetic gold-digging leech!" Harrison barked, shoving her violently into the hallway. "Get out of my sight before I have my security throw you off the roof." Savannah stumbled into the corridor, sobbing hysterically, as Harrison marched past the heavily armed federal agents and disappeared into the VIP elevator. The sound of her wailing echoed down the hall, a perfect soundtrack to Cameron's complete destruction. Inside the dining room, Patricia and Vanessa Rhodes were backed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking like they had just watched a ghost rise from the grave. Patricia's face was a mask of sheer, unadulterated horror. The realization had finally broken through her massive ego. The puzzle pieces had snapped together in her mind. Aegis Financial. Patricia whispered, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the words. "The debt holding company, the foreclosure, that was you." I turned to face my former mother-in-law, smoothing the front of my midnight blue jacket. I smiled, a sharp, predatory smile that held absolutely no warmth. "I told you I was securing my assets, Patricia," I replied, my voice dripping with cold satisfaction. "You funded your pathetic aristocratic lifestyle with toxic debt, using your estate as collateral. When your primary lenders got nervous, I quietly purchased your entire debt portfolio through my shell company for pennies on the dollar. I own your mortgage. I own your credit lines. I own every single piece of designer clothing you are currently wearing. And because your son just lost his multi-billion-dollar bailout, you have absolutely no way to pay me back. You are permanently bankrupt." Vanessa let out a sharp, terrified sob, dropping her smartphone onto the floor. "Mom, what do we do?" Vanessa cried, grabbing Patricia's arm. "We have no money. We have nowhere to live." "You can start by finding a legal clinic," I suggested, echoing the exact malicious advice Patricia had given me days earlier. "I hear they do excellent pro bono work for destitute women with no viable skills." Patricia's knees buckled. She slid down the glass window, collapsing onto the polished hardwood floor in a heap of $40,000 silk and absolute ruin. She buried her face in her hands, crying hysterically, as the reality of her permanent poverty finally crushed her. I turned back to Cameron. He was standing alone at the head of the table, completely paralyzed. The arrogant, untouchable billionaire had vanished. He was just a pathetic, broken man staring into the abyss. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, begging for a mercy he had never once shown me. "Bethany." "Please," Cameron whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "You won. You proved your point. Just let me walk away. I will sign whatever you want. Just let me go." I looked at the man who had spent a decade making me feel small, stupid, and worthless. I felt absolutely nothing for him. "I do not negotiate with criminals," I stated flatly, turning my back on him. The two federal auditors stepped forward, flanking Cameron on both sides. "Mr. Rhodes, you are under arrest for corporate fraud, embezzlement, and the attempted unauthorized sale of classified federal assets," the lead auditor announced, pulling a heavy set of steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Cameron let out a raw, animalistic sound of despair, as the agents grabbed his arms, twisting them roughly behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my absolute freedom. I did not stay to watch them read him his rights. I walked smoothly toward the exit, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. General Mitchell fell into step beside me, the tactical team parting seamlessly to let us pass. We walked out of the dining room, leaving the wailing, pathetic remains of the Rhodes family trapped behind us. We bypassed the lobby, taking the private secure elevator directly up to the roof of the apex tower. The heavy steel door pushed open, revealing the cool night air and the flashing red and green navigation lights of a massive twin-engine military transport helicopter waiting on the helipad. The rotors were already spinning, whipping the Washington wind into a fierce, howling frenzy. General Mitchell extended his hand, gesturing toward the open side door of the helicopter. "After you, CEO," he said, shouting over the roar of the engines, his face breaking into a rare, genuine smile. I stepped forward, climbing into the cabin of the aircraft. I looked out over the glittering skyline of the city as the helicopter lifted smoothly into the dark sky. The heavy, suffocating weight of my past was entirely gone. I had walked into the federal slaughterhouse and I had burned it to the ground. My wealth was secure. My respect was undeniable. My independence was absolute. I was finally truly untouchable. The true measure of power is never found in how loudly someone demands respect, but in the quiet, undeniable weight of their actions. In a world that often rewards aggressive posturing and the illusion of success, it is easy to feel small when surrounded by people who constantly diminish your worth. The individuals who shout the loudest about their superiority are often standing on a fragile foundation of toxic debt manipulation and stolen achievements. Their greatest and most fatal mistake is mistaking silence for weakness. The profound lesson here is that you must never allow the architects of your suffering to write the final chapter of your life. When dealing with deeply toxic or narcissistic environments, the natural human instinct is to argue, to plead for validation, or to desperately try to prove your value. However, true liberation requires a completely different tactical approach. It requires stepping off the emotional battlefield that they control. It means redirecting your energy away from seeking their approval and pouring it entirely into building an independent, unshakable foundation that they cannot touch. Victory does not come from engaging in petty, exhausting squabbles. It comes from meticulously securing your own assets, mastering your craft, and trusting your own intellect. When you do the quiet, disciplined work in the shadows, you do not need to demand an apology. You simply let the devastating natural consequences of their own arrogance dismantle the empire they built on your back. Have you ever found yourself trapped by people who severely underestimated your potential? Have you ever had to walk away in silence, only to rebuild your life and return with undeniable strength? Share your journey of reclaiming your power in the comments below. If this story of strategic resilience resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more tales of triumph and ultimate justice.